Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I worked as a park ranger for almost 20 years, mostly in the northern part of the state, where the forest gets thick and the lakes sit like mirrors. After I retired, I didn't keep in touch much, but I'd still go out there sometimes, mostly just to visit the lake I used to patrol. It's quiet, isolated, a good place to clear your head. Thing is, there was one story I told people for years that nobody really believed. I was the kind of guy who never liked to talk much about strange stuff, but this one kept coming up, and I figured I might as well say it. It was about a light, a very particular light, or actually 3 of them. Every year, on the same night in late August, I'd see these 3 lights over the lake, arranged in a perfect triangle. The bottom 2 were closer to the water's surface, and the top one hovered maybe 100 feet higher. The formation stayed completely still, like just hanging in the air. No blinking, no movement, no sound. Just 3 bright white lights, sharp and clear against the dark sky. I first noticed it years ago when I was out on a late patrol. I just finished checking the campsites and was driving along the dirt road that ran along the eastern shore. It was late, maybe 11 p.m., and the forest was dead quiet except for crickets. I looked up, and there they were. Those 3 lights, perfectly still, right over the water. At first, I thought it was some weird reflection or maybe lights from a boat, but there wasn't a boat or any movement on the lake at all. It didn't flicker or change like a plane or helicopter, just sat there like something was watching. I pulled over, got out, and stared at it for a long time. The air felt heavier somehow. I didn't hear anything unusual, no engines, no animals reacting, nothing. After maybe 10 minutes, the lights just vanished. Not faded, just gone, like someone switched them off. The next year, same night, same time, same thing. I told a few coworkers, but they laughed it off or said I was seeing things. A couple thought maybe it was some prank with spotlights, but the area is way too remote for that. Over the years, I kept watching, sometimes alone, sometimes with other rangers who were curious or just humoring me. No one else ever saw it, but I did, every year, without fail. Same place, same formation, same silence. One year, I decided to bring a camera with a zoom lens. I stayed up late by the shore, hoping to get a picture or video. When the lights showed, I tried to focus, but the camera kept having trouble locking on. The lights were too bright, but when I looked at the footage later, all you could see was 3 blurry orbs. No shape, no details. That was frustrating, but the weirdest part came after. When I played back the audio from the camera, there was this low hum, almost like static, but with a rhythm, something like a pulse. It wasn't audible when I was there, but it was definitely on the recording. That started to mess with me. If I couldn't hear it, but it was there, what else was I missing? I didn't bring it up much after that. Most people just wrote me off as the old ranger who liked to tell stories. Then a few years ago, the park authorities shut down public access to the lake. They said it was due to safety concerns. Some structural issues with the docks, erosion, that kind of thing. But the timing was odd and the closure was permanent. I kept hearing rumors from old friends still working there that the closure wasn't just about the docks. Something about repeated reports from other rangers of strange lights, noises, and odd equipment failures. Nobody official would confirm it though. I don't get out there much anymore. But sometimes, on the anniversary of the first time I saw those lights, I drive past the closed gate and park by the road. I look up at the lake, and sometimes, if the night is still enough, I think I can see faint glimmers where the lights used to be. It's been years since anyone's reported seeing them. Maybe they stopped, or maybe no one's around to watch anymore. Whatever it was there, night after night, year after year, over that lake. And that's the only thing I'm sure of. I was 16 when this happened, summer before my senior year. We lived out in the country, just a small house on the edge of a big cornfield that stretched for miles. I spent a lot of my free time wandering around outside, mostly at night, since I like the quiet and being away from everyone. My phone had a decent camera, and I used it a lot for random stuff, taking videos of the stars, the corn moving in the wind, stuff like that. One night, maybe around 11 p.m., I was out by the field again. I don't remember what made me look up, but I saw these lights. 3 of them, floating just above the tops of the corn stalks. They were kind of dim, but bright enough to be weird. They didn't look like stars or planes. They were moving slowly, almost drifting, but not in a smooth way. More like they were just kind of there, hovering in a line. I pulled my phone out and started recording. I figured maybe it was some kind of drone or something and wanted to catch it on video. The lights stayed there for a while, not making any noise. I kept the camera trained on them as they moved slowly across the field, almost like they were scanning or searching. The air felt still, heavier than usual, but there was no wind or anything. After a few minutes, the lights suddenly blinked out. All 3 of them just vanished at once. It was so sudden that I froze, staring at where they'd been. I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it for a second. I kept the camera on, waiting to see if they'd come back, but nothing. Then I heard a soft rustling from the cornfield just to my left. It was faint, like something moving through the stalks, but I couldn't see anything. I turned the camera slowly toward the sound, but all I caught was darkness and some shadows shifting with the moonlight. That's when I started feeling kind of uneasy. The silence felt unnatural, like something was wrong with the whole area. I didn't want to be out there alone anymore, so I put the phone away and started walking back to the house. The walk felt longer than usual. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, but I never saw anything. Still, I had the feeling I was being watched. When I got inside, I locked the door and sat down with the phone to watch the video. Here's the thing. When I played it back, the footage was just an hour-long clip of me standing still, holding the phone, not moving the camera at all. No lights, no rustling, no strange shadows, just me, frozen in place, silent in the dark. I checked the timestamp. It matched exactly when I was outside. The battery on the phone was fine, and the video file wasn't corrupted or anything. It just didn't show what I remembered seeing, like the lights and sounds never existed. I kept trying to find the part with the lights or the rustling, but it was just that one long shot of me standing there, motionless. I even showed it to my little sister, who thought it was creepy, but had no idea what to make of it. For days after, I kept going back to that spot, hoping maybe I'd catch something else or figure out what happened. But the field was normal again. No lights, no sounds, just the usual rustling corn. Sometimes at night, when it's really quiet, I swear I hear that same rustling sound coming from the field, like something is moving just out of sight. And sometimes I catch a glimpse of a light flickering far off, but when I look again, it's gone. I don't know what I saw that night or why the video didn't capture it. All I know is it wasn't just my imagination. I was flying a deadhead leg back to Denver, empty cabin, clear skies, no weather in the area. This was late September a couple years ago. We were cruising at 45,000 feet in a Gulfstream G450, just me and the co-pilot, Sam. He'd gone to the back to grab coffee, so I was alone in the cockpit for maybe 5 or 6 minutes when it started. I was facing forward, running through checklists, watching the displays. Everything was normal, clean radar, smooth air, no turbulence. I glanced out the left window and noticed a glow, like someone had turned on a flashlight behind the wingtip. At first I thought it might have been a reflection from something inside the cockpit, but it was coming from outside. It had this weird white-blue color. Not like strobes or nav lights, closer to a welding arc, but softer. It was holding pace with us, just off our left side, maybe 100 feet out, slightly behind the wing. I couldn't make out a shape, just the light. It didn't blink or pulse, it didn't move closer, it just stayed there. Silent. I leaned forward and craned to get a better angle. I couldn't see any structure, no fuselage, no wings, no rotors, nothing, just the glow. It looked like it was keeping position perfectly, matching our speed. At that altitude, we were doing about Mach 0.80, around 530 knots true airspeed. Nothing holds that kind of formation unless it's a jet. But there was nothing on TCAS, not even a distant blip. I called Sam back to the cockpit, tried to keep my voice even. He came up behind me and leaned over, and I just pointed left. He froze when he saw it. We both stared for a few seconds. Then he asked, "What is that?" I said I didn't know. We watched it together for maybe 15 seconds before I called center. I keyed up and said, "Denver Center, Gulfstream 450 Alpha Hotel. Do you have any traffic off our left side about 100 feet out?" There was a pause. Then they came back. -0 Alpha Hotel. We're not showing any traffic within 50 miles. Confirm your position. I gave them our position and heading. They came back again after a few seconds. We're not painting anything near you. Are you requesting deviation? I looked at Sam. He shook his head. The thing wasn't threatening us, just pacing. I told center, negative on deviation for now, just checking. We've got a visual on something off our port side, not showing on TCAS. They acknowledged. We didn't say anything else. About 30 seconds later, the glow started to dim. Not blink or vanish, just gradually faded, like a dimmer switch. Then it was gone. Not a trace. We both sat there for a while, quiet. I asked Sam if he saw any shape or outline. He said no, just the light. We pulled up the radar overlay again, checked for any weather anomalies, heat signatures, anything. It was clean. Absolutely nothing in our area. About 10 minutes later, I noticed something strange with the displays. The heading indicator and the altitude readout both froze for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, just locked up. Then they jumped back to normal. Not a big deal, probably a glitch, but it happened on both our panels at the exact same time. That's rare. Sam ran a quick diagnostics check. Everything looked fine, no warnings, no faults logged. The rest of the flight was uneventful. We landed on time. When we debriefed, we agreed not to file an official report. There wasn't anything to report, really. No near miss, no deviation, no confirmed traffic. Just a light we both saw, and some instruments acting weird. That was the only time I've ever seen something like that in the air. I've logged over 9,000 hours. I know what commercial aircraft look like. I know what military formations look like. I know how radar works and what TCAS should pick up. This thing didn't behave like any of that. I don't talk about it much, but Sam saw it too. So I know I didn't imagine it. I was camping solo out near the Kaibab National Forest, northern Arizona. This was last fall. I try to do one solo trip a year just to get away from everything for a few days. I've done that area a few times before. Lots of dispersed camping spots off the forest roads, and it's quiet. No light pollution, no cell service. I set up about 3 miles off the main highway down an unmarked dirt road. There's a flat clearing ringed by ponderosa pines, maybe a quarter-mile wide. No signs of recent campers, no tire tracks, no trash. Just birds and wind. I pitched my tent, gathered some firewood, made a small pit, all that. I spent the afternoon hiking a little ways into the woods behind camp. Didn't see much besides a couple deer and some rabbit prints. I was back before dusk. It got cold quick after the sun went down. I had the fire going, cooking some canned chili on my camp stove. I had one of those inflatable pads and a decent sleeping bag, so I knew I'd be fine overnight. Just passed the time reading, walking short laps around the clearing, enjoying the quiet. No weird feelings, no animals close by. Around 9:30, I put the fire out and sat by the tent with a headlamp on, finishing my book. That's when I first noticed the lights. I saw them while stretching my neck. Just happened to look up. 3 bright white dots, perfectly spaced in a horizontal line. Not blinking, not moving. Too far apart to be part of one aircraft, but too symmetrical to be random stars. They weren't flickering like stars either, more like tiny, steady floodlights. At first I figured maybe they were some kind of military thing. I've seen satellites and planes out there before. But these weren't moving. I watched them for a minute. 2 minutes. Nothing. Just hanging there. I turned off my headlamp to see better. The sky was otherwise clear. I could see stars everywhere else, even the faint band of the Milky Way. These 3 lights stood out. They were brighter than anything else in the sky and perfectly still. I started to get this weird crawling feeling, like I was being watched. Not in a paranoid way, just like pressure. Like something was aware of me looking up. I stood and grabbed my flashlight, a big mag light, and pointed it up. Not directly at the lights, just up in their general direction. I clicked it on and aimed it toward them. Instantly, And I mean instantly. All three lights blinked off. Not faded, not moved, just gone. All at once. I lowered the flashlight, waited. Nothing came back. The sky was normal again. Just stars. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, trying to see if they'd return. They didn't. I turned in early after that. I wasn't exactly scared, but I felt uneasy, like I'd interrupted something. I kept the rain fly off the tent so I could look up while lying down. I didn't see the lights again, but something else was off. Around 1 a.m. I woke up. Not because of a sound, just woke up, totally alert. The air felt heavier, if that makes sense. I stayed still for a while, listening. No wind, no bugs, nothing. Usually there's some night noise out there, an owl rustling in the underbrush, something. This was just silent. I sat up, looked out through the mesh of the tent. Stars were still out. The woods around me looked the same, but I noticed my watch wasn't backlit anymore. Just dead black. I reached for my headlamp and hit the button. Nothing. Same with my flashlight. I checked the batteries later. They were fine, but in that moment, they were just dead. I didn't hear anything, but the silence was weird. Heavy. I stayed sitting up for a long time. I had this feeling I shouldn't unzip the tent. Not out of fear, exactly. Just a strong gut sense not to open it. Eventually, maybe an hour later, the ambient sounds came back all at once. Like someone hit unmute on the forest. Crickets, a breeze through the trees, distant rustling. My watch light came on again. The headlamp worked. I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, everything seemed totally normal. No weird footprints, no markings, no animals close by. I packed up early and left by 8. That trip didn't put me off camping, but I haven't been back to that spot since. And I haven't seen lights like that again. I was the night custodian at a rural K-8 school for about 3 years. It's a small place, just one building surrounded by woods and farmland. We had a pretty decent security setup for such a quiet area. Motion-activated lights, cameras covering every entrance, and floodlights on each corner of the building. Nothing fancy, just enough to deter any kids messing around after hours or the occasional raccoon. Most nights were uneventful. I'd start around 5:30, do my cleaning rounds, check the boiler, walk the halls. I usually finished by 10, but sometimes I stayed later just to avoid going home to my empty place. There were only 2 of us with keys at night, me and the principal, and she never came by after dark. This happened in early October. I remember because it was the first night I had to wear my heavier jacket. Cold, dry air, and no wind. The building always creaked a little more when it started cooling down for winter, but nothing that ever bothered me. That night, I was in the main hallway around 9:45, mopping near the front office. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from the security app, which I rarely checked, usually just motion alerts from animals or bugs flying near the cameras. But this one said, West Wing exterior light activated. Then, not even 10 seconds later, another one. North Wing exterior light activated. Then east, then south. The lights were on separate systems, each tied to its own motion detector. They shouldn't all go off in sequence like that unless something was literally circling the building. I walked over to the office and pulled up the live camera feeds. Each side of the building was lit up like a stadium, but nothing showed on any of the cameras. No person, no animal, not even a shadow. I waited, watching. About a minute later, the west light turned off. Then 30 seconds later, the north. Then east. Then south. Like, whatever it was had just walked a full loop and then left. I went outside with my flashlight, walking the perimeter just in case. I didn't see anyone. The gravel path around the building was undisturbed. No footprints, no tire tracks. The grass was slightly damp from the cold, and there weren't any markings or broken blades. Nothing had been tampered with. Doors were still locked. I went back in and checked the timestamps on the footage. The lights had gone on in a perfect clockwise pattern, one after another, with about 7 seconds between each activation. I rewound to earlier in the night, nothing out of the ordinary. But when I watched the sequence again, I noticed something weird. There was this shift in the image. Just before each light came on, the camera feed would flicker slightly, not like a glitch or freeze, more like the image warped for half a second. The picture would stretch or compress along one side, then snap back to normal. No static, just that strange bending. I watched it over and over. The warping happened maybe 1 second before the light kicked on, every single time. But there was never anything in frame. Not a person, not a bug, not even dust. I checked the camera logs for errors, nothing flagged, no power surges, no dropped frames. I emailed the footage to myself. I still have it. The next night, I got in around the same time and started my usual rounds. Everything felt normal for the first hour or so. Then around 8:30, the west light activated again. Then north, then east, then south. Same pattern, same spacing. I watched the cameras live this time. Nothing. Just those weird flickers in the video feed, then the lights popping on. I stayed by the monitor until the lights shut off again. This time, instead of doing a perimeter walk, I decided to test something. I walked out to the west side and stood directly under the motion sensor, moving around, waving my arms. The camera picked me up immediately. Crystal clear. No flickering, no delay. I walked the entire perimeter slowly, checking each light and sensor. Everything was functioning normally. But for the rest of the night, nothing else happened. I brought it up with the principal the next day. She brushed it off as maybe a deer or some wind setting them off. I told her about the camera distortion, and she said the system was overdue for an upgrade anyway. The third night, I was jumpy. I kept the monitor open on the desk while I cleaned. At 9:12 p.m., the same sequence started again. West, north, east, south. This time, I didn't go outside. I just watched. The warping was more noticeable now, almost like a wave pushing through the image. The light from each lamp bent too, like the beams were curving slightly before straightening out. I scrubbed through the footage after it stopped and froze on one frame from the north camera. It was just for a fraction of a second, but the lens caught something. A shadow. Tall, narrow, almost like a vertical smudge against the building. No detail. It didn't move like a person. It looked like it just appeared and disappeared between frames. After that night, I stopped staying late. I finished my rounds quickly and left by 9. The lights still triggered now and then, but I ignored the alerts. I didn't want to know. 2 weeks later, I came in on a Monday and noticed the weekend footage was corrupted. All of it, from Friday night through Sunday. Black screens, no logs, like the system had been wiped. The principal said it was a software update gone wrong, but the rest of the system worked fine. Only that 3-day window was missing. I never saw the lights go off in sequence again after that. Not like before, but sometimes I'd be inside and one of the corners would light up on its own. I'd check the camera and there'd be that little flicker again, just a moment of distortion. I left the job in April. I didn't mention any of it to the person who replaced me. The cameras still work. I checked last month out of curiosity. The footage is clean, the lights still go on sometimes, but I haven't seen that shadow again. I was hiking alone in Central Oregon last summer, not too far from Sisters. I'd done that trail a few times before, but this time I decided to push deeper off the main loop just to see what was out there. I had my GPS watch, a paper map, and enough water and food for the day. It wasn't supposed to be anything big, just a long afternoon hike and back to my truck before dark. Around noon, I left the marked trail. There was a dry creek bed that ran east, and I figured I'd follow it for a bit before looping back. It was quiet, like unusually quiet. I didn't see any birds, and the wind had totally died. The only sound was my boots on the gravel and the occasional creak of the trees. About 45 minutes in, I stopped to eat and check my bearings. Everything seemed normal. My watch said I was about 3.5 miles from the trailhead, which made sense. I hadn't seen any other hikers since morning. No litter, no cairns, no blazes, just untouched forest. I kept going maybe another half hour, and that's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just a strange-looking tree. From a distance, it looked like it had been struck by lightning or maybe damaged by snow because the shape was all wrong. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't broken. It was deliberate. Every single branch from the trunk all the way up had been bent sharply upward at a right angle. Not snapped or hanging, bent cleanly like pipe, and they were all pointing straight up toward the sky. It didn't look natural. The branches weren't twisted or jagged, just this perfect 90-degree bend like they'd been softened and reshaped. Even the small ones, the twigs, every one of them was bent upward. No leaves on the tree either, but it was green beneath the bark, alive. I stood there staring at it for a long time, trying to figure out what I was looking at. I even walked around it a few times, looking for scorch marks or tool damage. Nothing. The bark wasn't stripped. No saw cuts, no evidence of people messing with it. Then I looked up. There was a faint hum in the air. Not loud, more like the feeling of sound than actual sound. Like when a big truck idles far off in the distance, but there's no engine noise, just pressure. I turned off my watch, thinking maybe it was buzzing, but it wasn't that. I took a few steps back and checked my phone, thinking I'd take a picture. That's when I noticed I had no service, not even emergency SOS, which didn't make sense because I had full bars earlier and hadn't gone that far. I tried to take a photo anyway, but the camera app glitched and froze. The screen stayed black and wouldn't respond. I had to force restart it, and even then it took forever to come back on. When it finally did, the battery had dropped from 82% to 19%. I hadn't used it at all since checking the map. I backed away from the tree, but the hum stayed with me. I looked around, trying to see if there was something else nearby. Power lines, a transformer, a plane overhead, but there was nothing. The sky was clear, no wind. The sun felt a little dim, though, like there was something between me and it, even though I couldn't see anything. I didn't want to be there anymore. I started heading back toward the creek bed, moving fast but trying not to panic. I kept checking over my shoulder, even though I didn't see or hear anything behind me. It just felt wrong, like the air was heavy. I passed a few trees that looked like they'd been burned long ago, black trunks, no underbrush, and realized I hadn't noticed them on the way in. That threw me off. I pulled out the map and tried to reorient myself, but the creek wasn't where I thought it should be. I walked another 10 minutes and never found it. Just more trees, all starting to look the same. At some point I stopped walking and just stood still, listening. Nothing. No birds, no bugs, no planes, just that low, pressure-like hum. And then it stopped, like someone hit a switch. The sudden silence was even worse. I decided to follow the slope downhill, figuring it would eventually lead to a road or the main trail. I kept my compass out, but the needle kept twitching slightly, like it couldn't settle on north. Not spinning wildly, just enough to notice. That's when I heard something above me. It wasn't a plane. It didn't have that Doppler shift or engine sound. It was more like a low whoosh, like a big piece of fabric being dragged slowly through the air. I looked up and didn't see anything. The sky was still clear, but the shadows on the ground didn't match. The light flickered for a few seconds, like something was moving between the sun and the trees, but nothing was there. I crouched down and waited. I didn't move for a long time, probably 15, 20 minutes. Eventually the light went back to normal. The warmth returned. Birds started chirping again, one at a time. I stood up and picked a direction. I didn't even try to find the trail at that point. I just wanted something, a road, a sign, a fence. After about an hour of hiking without stopping, I crossed a dirt path with tire tracks and followed it west. That finally led to a Forest Service road, and from there I was able to get a signal and call a friend. When I checked my watch, it said it was 5:23 p.m. I'd only planned to be out for about 5 hours, but the GPS log showed a 4-hour gap with no movement, just a single point, like I'd stood still the entire time. I don't remember stopping for more than a few minutes. I drove home that night and didn't tell anyone. Not right away. I tried to go back a few weeks later with a buddy, but we couldn't find the tree. We searched for hours and didn't even see the burned trunks I'd passed. The forest felt different, like it had shifted somehow. I still have the GPS track from my watch. It shows that weird static point way off the main trail, just sitting there, like I was standing still for 4 hours. It happened on a Saturday in late October, a few years ago. My girlfriend and I were driving through a mountain pass in northern Utah, heading back from visiting her mom. It was just after 6 p.m., starting to get dark, and we figured we'd take the scenic route through the Wasatch instead of the interstate. Not the smartest choice in hindsight. We weren't in a rush. It was supposed to be a 2-hour drive, give or take. We had snacks, good weather, and my car had just been serviced the week before. Everything felt normal. About an hour in, Somewhere past a small town called Oak Ridge, the road got twistier and more narrow. The kind of route where there's no shoulder, just a drop on one side and a wall of trees on the other. Still paved, but definitely not a highway. There weren't any other cars around, but that didn't seem weird at the time. We were talking about something stupid, I think a show we'd been watching, and then my girlfriend tried to change the song. That's when she noticed the phone had no signal. I glanced at mine too. No bars, no LTE, no 1X, just nothing. The GPS had stopped updating too. It still showed our little blue dot moving, but the map tiles weren't loading anymore, like it got stuck. That wasn't too strange. There's always dead zones in the mountains. I figured we'd reconnect in a few minutes. But then she tried to put on the radio instead, and it was just static. Every station. She went through the whole dial. Not even a hint of sound, just white noise. I remember feeling a little annoyed, not scared. I thought maybe we'd taken a wrong turn or something. But the road was still paved, still had signs. We passed a green mile marker a few minutes later, something like mile 14, but no highway name. It started getting colder too. I noticed it when I turned down the fan and felt a weird draft around my legs, like the air inside the car wasn't matching the heater. My girlfriend zipped up her hoodie and pulled her sleeves over her hands, and I remember making a joke about how she was always cold. She didn't laugh. The road narrowed again, enough that I slowed down to maybe 25. No guardrails, just tight curves and black trees pressing in close on both sides. Our headlights were the only thing visible. No stars, no moon, just complete darkness outside the beam. We drove like that for a while. I'm not sure how long. I remember starting to feel weirdly tired. Not sleepy exactly, just dulled. Like the hum of the tires and the heater and the dark outside was all starting to blend together. I realized at one point I hadn't blinked in a while. My eyes were dry. My girlfriend wasn't saying anything either. She was just staring straight ahead. Then the headlights caught something up ahead. It looked like a curve sign at first, those yellow arrow ones, but when we got closer, it wasn't reflective, just flat, dull metal, leaning at a weird angle, like it had been bent and never fixed. There weren't any markings on it, no words, just a blank gray sign half covered in rust. And right after we passed it, there was this loud thump under the car. Not like we hit something, more like something hit us. Just once, enough that it jolted us. I stopped the car. My girlfriend looked at me and said, "What was that?" I got out with my phone flashlight and checked. Tires were fine, nothing leaking. I even got down and looked under the front bumper. No dents, no branches or rocks, nothing. When I got back in, she asked if we should turn around. I said no. I didn't want to backtrack through all that again in the dark, and I really thought we were close to getting out of the hills, so I kept driving. That's when things started feeling wrong. The road didn't change. At all. Same curve, same angle, same trees. We passed another mile marker, but it said mile 14 again. I thought maybe I imagined that until we passed the weird bent sign again. And then the thump. Same exact spot, same sound. I braked hard this time. My girlfriend gasped and looked at me like she was about to panic. I didn't even check the car again. I just stared out the windshield, trying to make sense of it. We couldn't be looping. That's not how roads work. There weren't any turnoffs, no places to circle back, just a straight road through the mountains. We sat there for maybe a minute. I had my foot on the brake the whole time, and my hands were sweating. I could feel my heartbeat in my neck. She was whispering something, but I don't think it was words, just a kind of muttering. Then, all at once, the radio came back. Loud, crackling music blasted out, some classic rock station, mid-song. The GPS blinked back to life and reloaded our route. We both jumped like we'd been shocked. I looked at the map and saw that we were suddenly just outside a town called Pine Grove. Here's the thing. Pine Grove was at least 30 miles past where I thought we were. There's no way we could have gotten there in that time. It was like we skipped a whole chunk of road. I pulled over immediately, right near a small gas station, and checked the mileage. We'd gone almost 60 miles since Oak Ridge, but the time didn't match. We'd only been driving for about 90 minutes total. That stretch of mountain road should have taken us twice as long at the speed we were going. And neither of us remembered driving it. No scenery, no curves, no signs, nothing. We sat there in the parking lot for a long time. I think I refueled just to do something with my hands. My girlfriend didn't say anything for a while, and when she finally did, all she said was, "Can we take the highway back next time?" We never talked about it again, not in detail. I still have no idea what happened. I even drove that same route again months later during the day. I recognized the first half of the drive up through Oak Ridge, but after that, nothing looked familiar. No rusted sign, no weird curves, and I never saw another mile 14 marker. There were no thumps under the car that time, no static on the radio, but I still don't like driving through the mountains anymore. I was going through footage from a high altitude balloon launch we did back in September. We'd set it up outside of Alamosa, Colorado, near the edge of the wildlife refuge. Pretty standard weather data collection run. The kind of thing I've done maybe 24 times since I started working with the small research outfit last year. Everything looked normal on launch day. The weather was clear, minimal wind. We launched just after sunrise to get a full day's worth of readings. Balloon reached 92,000 feet before bursting, which was about what we expected. We retrieved the payload later that afternoon using the GPS tracker. It had landed in a dry pasture about 8 miles east. Nothing looked off when we picked it up. The cameras we attach are basic GoPros, one pointing down, one pointing out horizontally, and one facing up toward the balloon. They start recording at launch and run until the battery dies or the unit hits the ground. It's mostly used to review wind layers visually or catch failure patterns if something goes wrong. I didn't get around to reviewing the footage until a couple days later. The data loggers had already been pulled and the raw numbers looked fine, so I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. I skimmed through the footage at first, just checking for turbulence or drift anomalies, but around the 27-minute mark on the horizontal facing camera, I noticed a little dark speck in the distance. At first I thought it was a bird or a plane, some optical thing. It was far off, maybe half a mile out, but it seemed to be keeping pace with the balloon. Same general elevation, always at the same distance. I let it roll. The balloon kept climbing and the object stayed with it. Never got closer, never drifted. Just this small dark dot on the horizon. Not pulsing, not spinning, not wobbling like a drone would. I figured maybe it was a lens artifact or some kind of reflection, but it wasn't static. It stayed in the same place relative to the balloon's movement, like it was tethered at a distance. Then I flipped to the downward-facing camera. That one's angled directly below the payload, so it captures the ground during ascent. At that point in the footage, the balloon was about 40,000 feet up. You could see the curve of the Earth starting to take shape. Clear shadows, our own rig, clouds, the balloon itself. Everything cast a clear shadow except that one object. I checked frame by frame. Our balloon's shadow tracked just fine, elongated and drifting slightly with the angle of the sun, but the object had nothing. No shadow beneath it, no light glinting off its surface. It just stayed matte and featureless. I couldn't even tell what shape it was. Just a perfectly consistent dark spot. Not spherical, not angular, just neutral. I switched over to the upward-facing camera, which looks at the underside of the balloon. Sometimes you catch birds or insects close to launch, or you can see the balloon stretching as it climbs. At around 50,000 feet, you can see the balloon jitter slightly, nothing major, nothing but a wind pocket. But right at that moment, the horizon camera catches the object pulsing. Just once. Not a light, but like the image itself, warped for a single frame. Almost like a heat ripple, but more focused. It didn't affect any other part of the frame, just the object. I pulled the footage onto a desktop and went through it again with better software. I zoomed in frame by frame, trying to get a clearer look. The thing never rotated. It never blinked or emitted anything. It never changed position. Every time the balloon shifted, it matched. Every altitude, every wobble, even when we got some brief spin from turbulence. It adjusted in perfect sync, like it was locked at a fixed distance on a gimbal. That alone was weird, but it got stranger during descent. After the balloon burst, around 92,000 feet, the payload begins its drop. You usually get wild motion at that point until the parachute stabilizes. That all looked normal. But at around 70,000 feet, just as the descent smooths out, the object's gone. Not blurred out, not phased or falling behind. One frame it's there and the next it isn't. No motion away. Just not there anymore. I jumped back a few seconds and watched again. Same thing. Present, still, locked in place, and then nothing. I started wondering if I'd missed it on other launches. I pulled footage from a balloon we launched the month before. Different region, further east toward Kansas. Different conditions. Reviewed the horizontal cam. Nothing. Upward, downward, normal. No specks, no synced objects. I went through 6 more data sets over the next week. Nothing even remotely similar. I showed a couple clips to my supervisor who's worked with NOAA. He just said it was probably a drone or another research payload, but it wasn't a drone. It didn't move like one. And even if it was, it wouldn't explain the shadow issue. Everything at that height throws a shadow, even with limited atmosphere. This thing didn't interact with light at all. I didn't know what else to do with it. I didn't report anything officially. What would I even say? The GPS logs didn't show anything unusual. The data from the sensors matched every prediction. It's just the footage that doesn't line up. I checked airspace records. Nothing was logged for that time and place. No military, no civilian flights, no restricted zones. A few days after that, I had the footage up again, this time with color enhancement, trying to see if the object would react to different spectrum shifts. When I paused it to compare contrast levels, my monitor froze for maybe 5 seconds, just locked up completely. Then the screen went black and rebooted. I checked the files afterwards, still intact, nothing corrupted, but the metadata on that one clip had changed. The timestamp was off by 7 minutes. I hadn't touched it. The other files from the same batch were unchanged. I haven't flown since then, not because of what I saw exactly. Just been waiting for the next scheduled launch, which keeps getting pushed. I still don't know what it was. The footage is saved in 3 places now, but I haven't watched it again in over a month. Every time I think about it, I start wondering if it was even there, in a physical way. It didn't behave like it should have, and nothing in our equipment logged any proximity anomaly. No interference, nothing mechanical, just a shape that stayed exactly where it wanted to be until it didn't. It was around 11:30 on a Friday night. Me and my friend Josh were sitting out in these folding chairs behind his parents' place, just killing time and talking. They live out in this rural part of Tennessee, and the sky out there gets really clear when it's not cloudy. We'd been doing this every so often, grabbing a few beers, sitting outside, just hanging out. I wasn't even looking up when he said something like, "Hey, that one's moving weird." I thought he meant a plane at first, but when I looked where he was pointing, I saw this little blinking white light. It wasn't super bright or anything, looked like a star, but kind of pulsing. And it was just sitting there, not moving yet. Then it started to shift, not in a straight line like you'd expect from a satellite or a jet. It went up at a 90-degree angle, paused, went right, paused again, then down, then back left, square. It moved slow, maybe like half the speed of a commercial plane you'd see at cruising altitude, and each leg of the square took about 20 seconds. We both kind of laughed at first, like, okay, what the hell is that? I pulled my phone out and started filming, but all I could get was a blurry dot. It wasn't bright enough for the camera to focus on. I tried zooming in, messing with the exposure, but it didn't help. Meanwhile, the thing just kept going. It made another square, and then another. Same exact path over and over, always counterclockwise. It never drifted or changed altitude that we could tell. Just the same slow loop, like it was on rails. After 10 minutes or so, we stopped talking. It started to get really quiet around us. No wind, no bugs, nothing. I only noticed that later looking back, but there was a point where the usual night sounds just faded out. We kept watching. Josh tried using this star tracking app on his phone to see if it thought the thing was a satellite or something. It didn't register anything in that part of the sky. The light didn't show up on the app at all. He tried 3 or 4 different tools, and none of them labeled it. There weren't any flight paths over that area either. Closest airport was over an hour away. The weirdest part was how consistent it was. It never sped up or slowed down. Always paused for the exact same amount of time at each corner. 4 seconds, then the next move. Over and over. After a while, I started to feel this weird pressure in my chest. Not pain, exactly. Just this heavy, tight sensation, like I'd been holding my breath or something was weighing down on me. I mentioned it to Josh, and he just nodded, said he felt off too. We weren't dizzy or sick, just uncomfortable in a way that didn't have a clear source. At one point, I remember thinking I should stop looking at it, like I was staring too long. Not because it was bright or anything, but because it was making me feel not scared, really. More like I shouldn't be watching it, like I was intruding on something. It kept going, square after square. I'd stopped trying to record by then. My phone battery was dropping faster than usual, and the video files I did have didn't show anything useful, just a little shaky white dot. Josh checked his phone for the time. He goes, "Dude, it's only 11:37. I was like, "No way, that thing's been doing laps for over an hour." But I looked too, and yeah, only 7 minutes had passed since we first noticed it. We both kind of sat there in silence after that. Neither of us said it, but I think we both felt the same thing, like something was wrong, but not in a way you could name, like we'd missed something obvious. We kept watching, and just like that, it stopped, not like it flew off or faded out. 1 second it was there in mid-loop moving between two corners, and then it just wasn't. Gone. No streak, no blur, no blink, just vanished. We waited for a few more minutes, hoping it would show up again. Nothing. The stars looked normal. Everything else was back. Bugs buzzing, trees rustling, like flipping a switch. Josh lit a cigarette with shaky hands and said, "I feel like we weren't supposed to see that." We didn't talk much after that, just packed up and went inside. I didn't even finish my drink. The next day, I checked the videos again. One was only 3 seconds long. The other was 14 seconds, but it cut out halfway through and froze on a black screen. My phone had gone from 78% to 4% in the span of maybe 10 minutes. Josh had the same thing. He'd taken some photos that night too, but they were just black. Not even noise or stars, just pure black squares. Later that weekend, we tried to recreate the timing, how many loops we saw, how long they took, all of that. Based on how long each square took and how many we counted, we should have been sitting there for at least an hour. Probably closer to an hour and a half. But the phones, the watches, everything said just under 10 minutes had passed. We didn't tell anyone else for a long time. It just didn't sound believable. And the more we tried to explain it to ourselves, the less sense it made. There's no footage, no real proof, just what we saw and what our bodies were telling us wasn't right. I've been back to that spot a few times since, mostly out of habit. I still look up every time I'm there. Never saw anything like that again. But sometimes when it gets real quiet, I'll catch myself holding my breath without realizing it, like I'm waiting for something. I woke up on the couch around 3:40 in the morning. I remember the time because the microwave clock was one of the only things still glowing in the dark. I'd fallen asleep watching a game replay. Nothing unusual about that. What was weird was the room. It took me a few seconds to really notice anything. I stood up, stretched, felt the usual stiffness in my neck, then looked around and something just felt off. I couldn't place it right away, but everything was wrong. Just a little. Like the TV wasn't square to the wall anymore and the coffee table was slightly angled. Not much, just enough that it caught your eye if you knew what it was supposed to look like. At first I thought maybe I bumped into something while getting up, but then I noticed the armchair was also out of place, and the rug. Even the painting over the fireplace looked rotated, like someone had shifted it a few degrees clockwise. I walked around, checking each thing one by one. Everything was still there, nothing missing, nothing broken, just moved, slightly, and all in the same direction, like someone had nudged the whole room a few inches clockwise, piece by piece. It was too consistent to be random. I live alone, no pets, no overnight guests, no one had a key. I went to check the front door, and that's when I really froze. It was standing wide open, but the deadbolt and the chain lock were both still engaged. That shouldn't be possible. The bolt was slid into the frame and the chain was hanging exactly how it would if the door were closed and locked. But the door was wide open, maybe 2 feet from the jamb. It made no sense. The locks looked untouched. I stood there for a while just staring at it, trying to make sense of how that could happen. I even tried to close the door again while keeping the locks in place just to see if maybe something was broken. But the door couldn't move without unlocking them. There wasn't enough give. I turned on every light in the house and checked every room. No signs of anyone, no windows open, back door was locked and latched, no footprints, no scuff marks, no handprints on the doorknob or frame. I even pulled out a flashlight and looked at the baseboards and under furniture like an idiot. Nothing. The silence felt heavy. I remember that. Not just quiet, but like the house was holding its breath. I sat back on the couch and just tried to think. I wondered if I had sleepwalked, or maybe done something in a daze, but the locks didn't make sense, and even if I had somehow unlocked the door and opened it, how would I have re-engaged the deadbolt and chain with it open? That wasn't something I could explain away. Then I noticed my phone was dead. Not just low battery, completely black. That's odd because I'd plugged it in before falling asleep. I checked the outlet. It was working. The lamp next to it was still on. I swapped cables, tried charging it again. Nothing. Completely fried. When I turned back toward the living room, I caught another small thing. All the couch cushions were slightly shifted to the right. Not disheveled, just off by a few inches. Same direction as everything else. I hadn't noticed it before. It was like every object in that room had been gently pushed, like someone had taken a ruler and lined it all up along a curved axis, all clockwise, all subtle enough that you might miss it if you weren't paying attention. I went outside, just stood on the porch. Everything looked normal. Street was quiet, lights off in all the houses, no cars passing by, no wind, no animals, just that stillness. I waited maybe 10 minutes, just trying to ground myself, then went back in and locked the door again, checked the locks 3 times. I didn't go back to sleep, just sat in the kitchen with the lights on, drinking cold coffee and staring at my dead phone. Around 5, the birds started up, and for some reason that helped. It felt like the world had started moving again. When the sun came up, I went back to the living room. Everything was still in that weird, slightly rotated layout. I thought about putting it all back, but for some reason I couldn't. It felt wrong to touch anything. I waited until later that afternoon, then finally reset the room. It took a while to line everything up the way I remembered. I kept second-guessing it. Was the couch always that close to the wall? Did the chair always face this angle? I couldn't be sure anymore. I got a new phone that week. The old one never turned back on, even after trying a new battery. A friend who's into electronics said it looked like a power surge had fried the inside, but nothing else in the house was affected. My router, my TV, the microwave, they all worked fine. The locks were inspected by a handyman. He couldn't explain the door either. Said everything looked secure and functional, no damage, no tampering, just a normal, locked door. Nothing else like that's happened since. No missing time, no objects moving, no open doors. But I wake up more often now. Like my body's on alert for something. I sleep with the living room light on more nights than I'd admit. And every few weeks I'll walk in there and just check. Not for anything big. Just to make sure nothing's moved. It started late on a Thursday night. I was sitting on my front porch, smoking a cigarette, trying to wind down after a long day. It was quiet, one of those nights where everything feels still, like the whole neighborhood is holding its breath. I just finished telling my girlfriend goodnight when I noticed something odd up above the houses at the end of our cul-de-sac. There was this huge, dark shape hovering there, just above the tree line. At first, I thought it was a drone or maybe some kind of low-flying helicopter, but it made no sound. None. Not even the faintest hum. It was bigger than any drone I'd ever seen, more like the size of a small plane, maybe bigger. The shape was kind of oval, smooth edges, but no lights or markings. It didn't move, just hung there silently. The street lights lit up the bottom of it, so I could see the outline pretty clearly. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was imagining things, or maybe it was just a weird trick of the light. But it didn't go away. I even went inside to get my phone to take a picture, but the moment I stepped off the porch, it vanished. Just like that. No warning, no fading out. It was gone. I wasn't the only one who saw it that night either. The next morning, I was talking to a couple of neighbors, Karen from across the street, Mike down the road, and they said they'd seen the same thing. Karen said she was walking her dog and looked up to see it just hovering there, motionless and silent. Mike was out in his backyard grilling and noticed it too. We all agreed on the size and the shape. But the weird part is none of us heard a thing. No engines, no wind disturbance, nothing. And nobody could explain why it just disappeared when I went inside. The strangest thing is, I checked online and called the local airport. There were no flight logs or reports of any aircraft in the area at that time. No helicopters, no planes, no drones. The FAA said nothing unusual had been reported. The police said no calls had come in about anything strange. After a couple of days, a few more neighbors started mentioning that they saw it too. Some even said they felt this odd pressure in the air, like when a storm's about to roll in, but without the weather changing. Others said their pets were acting weird, nervous, restless. My cat stayed under the bed for 2 days straight. I started feeling a little paranoid, watching the sky whenever I was outside, especially at night. Sometimes I'd see small flickers of light way off in the distance, but they never got close, and they never made any noise. They felt detached, like someone or something was watching but didn't want to be noticed. One night, about a week after the first sighting, I was up late again, pacing the porch. It was colder than usual, the air damp and still. Then, out of nowhere, my street light flickered off and back on a few times. I looked up, hoping it was just a power glitch, but then I noticed a faint glow coming from behind the houses at the end of the cul-de-sac. The glow wasn't like a flashlight or a car's headlights. It was soft, pale, like someone had placed a lantern just behind the trees. It pulsed gently, like a slow heartbeat. I stood there watching for a few minutes. The glow shifted a little, moving behind the trees but never fully showing itself. Then the streetlight blinked off again, and when it came back, the glow was gone. That's when I started to feel real uneasy. I kept looking for a logical explanation, maybe a reflection from a neighbor's porch light or a distant car's headlights, but nothing added up. A couple of nights later, I was inside watching TV when I heard this low vibration. It wasn't loud, but it was there, underneath the normal sounds of the house, like something humming in the distance. I walked outside to check and saw nothing unusual, but that hum stayed with me for hours. The next morning, I found that some of the neighbors had left notes on doors, asking if anyone else had heard it or seen anything weird. Most said yes. The hum, the light, the big shape hovering, it had all become a shared experience, but no one could explain it. One of the neighbors, an older guy named Jim, told me he'd seen similar things years ago, but back then, nobody talked about it. You just kept it to yourself. Now, with phones and cameras everywhere, it felt different, but oddly, nobody had any real evidence. No photos, no videos, just a bunch of stories. I tried to take pictures myself, but every time I pulled out my phone and aimed at the sky, the screen would freeze or go black. It was like something was interfering with the camera, or maybe my phone just wouldn't cooperate when I needed it most. It's been a few weeks now since the first sighting, and the big shape hasn't come back. The strange glow and the humming happen less often, but the feeling that something's off never really left. I'm not sure what I saw or experienced. I can't say it was anything specific or explain what that big silent thing was. But something was there, something that didn't fit any normal pattern. The whole neighborhood talks about it now. But there's no record, no official explanation, and definitely no answers. Just a bunch of people who saw the same strange thing and don't quite know what to make of it. I woke up in the middle of the night and immediately knew something was off. It was too quiet. My apartment always has this low background hum, fridge, old ceiling fan, a bit of noise from the hallway, but everything was dead silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like your ears are plugged. I sat up and looked at the clock by my bed. The screen was black. I tapped it a few times, then reached over and hit the lamp switch. Nothing. Power was out. The only light was from the moon coming in through the window, kind of hazy, like there were thin clouds outside. I grabbed my watch off the nightstand, one of those basic analog ones, and checked the time. 4:17 a.m. I remember thinking that was weird because I'd gone to bed around 11 and felt like I'd been asleep longer than 5 hours. I don't usually wake up in the middle of the night, unless something loud happens, like a car horn or thunder. But this was different. It was just quiet. Then I noticed the ceiling fan was moving. Not fast, just slowly turning, but in reverse. It's one of those old pull chain types with wooden blades, and I always keep it on low overnight to help with the heat. Normally it spins clockwise, blowing air down, but it was going counterclockwise. And again, the power was out. I just sat there watching it for a few seconds, trying to figure out how that was possible. It wasn't spinning on leftover momentum. It had a rhythm, a steady speed like it was being powered. But everything else was dead. No digital clocks, no streetlights outside, even the fridge wasn't making noise. I got up and checked the window. I live on the 3rd floor, and my building faces an alley. Usually, there's a light at the far end that throws some orange glow onto the pavement. But it was pitch black. Couldn't see a thing except a pale reflection of my own face in the glass. I was going to check my phone for a flashlight, but when I hit the button, it didn't turn on. Battery had been over 70% when I went to bed. I tried holding the power button, nothing. Dead. I went to the bathroom and lit a candle I keep under the sink, just one of those little emergency tea lights. It was the only light I had. As soon as I lit it, I noticed the air in the apartment felt weird. Not stale exactly, but still. Like everything had stopped circulating. The candle flame didn't flicker. It just burned straight up. I stepped back into the bedroom and the fan had stopped, just completely still, like it had never been moving. I looked up at it for a while, expecting it to twitch or wobble or something, but nothing. I checked my watch again, still 4:17. I went out to the hallway. All the apartment doors were closed, no one moving around, no signs of other people even being awake. I stood there listening for footsteps or a toilet flush or anything, but the whole floor was dead silent. I tried the light switch in the hall just out of habit. Nothing. The whole building must have been out. I figured I'd go down to the lobby and see if anyone else was awake or if maintenance was around. The stairwell was pitch black, so I used the little tea light to light the way down. When I got to the lobby, the big windows were dark too. No cars passing, no light from the corner store across the street. It was like the whole block had been swallowed. I went up to the front doors and looked out. That's when I realized it wasn't just the building. There weren't any lights on anywhere. The street lights, the traffic signal at the corner, the apartment buildings across the way, nothing. Total blackout. But there wasn't a storm or anything. No wind, no rain, no emergency sirens. Just this quiet, dull silver light from the sky. I opened the door and stepped outside. It was cold. Not freezing, but colder than it should have been for that time of year. I walked a few steps into the street just to look around. That's when I noticed the sound. A low hum, really faint, like it was coming from underground or far away. Not mechanical, not like an engine or generator. Just a deep, steady vibration that I felt more than heard. Then I looked up. The sky wasn't right. I didn't notice it at first because it looked like a normal cloudy night. Pale gray with the moon barely visible behind it. But the clouds were moving in a circle. Slowly but definitely rotating like the whole sky was being stirred. And the motion was centered right above my building. I kept staring, trying to make sense of it. The hum got a little louder. Not much, just enough that I could feel it in my chest. And then the streetlight across from me blinked on, just for a second. Bright white light, no flicker, and then off again. Same with the one next to it, like a pulse. Not a power surge, it was too controlled. One blink. Off. Then another, a few seconds later. I backed toward the building, and when I got to the door, the lobby lights flicked on for half a second and went dark again. My watch still said 4:17. I went back up to my apartment. Everything looked the same. Fans still, phone still dead. The candle burned low on my bathroom counter. I sat on the edge of the bed and just waited. At some point, I don't remember feeling tired. I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, the sun was coming through the window. The power was back. Fan was spinning the right way again. Clock on the microwave said 8:42. My phone turned on fine. Full battery, no missed calls or alerts. My watch was still stuck at 4:17. I took it off and left it on the nightstand. It's still sitting there. My son started talking about it in early March. He's 6, and We've never had any real issues with nightmares or anything like that. He sleeps through the night. The night doesn't ask to leave lights on. He's always been really steady that way. So I paid attention when he suddenly started getting nervous about bedtime. The first time he mentioned it, I was tucking him in, and he asked me to close his curtains. They were usually open a little so the moonlight could come in. He liked that. But this time, he said, "Can you close them all the way? I don't want it to see me tonight." I paused and asked what he meant by it, and he just pointed toward the window and said, "The shape that follows the moon." His tone wasn't dramatic or scared, just matter of fact, like he was saying something totally normal. I didn't press. I figured it was something he saw in a cartoon, or maybe he misunderstood something from school. I told him there was nothing to worry about and closed the curtains, just to make him feel better. But the next few nights he kept asking, "Did you close them all the way? Don't let it see in." And then one night, this must have been maybe a week after that first time, I asked him directly what he was seeing. He said it was a bright shape, kind of like the moon, but sharper, and that it moved when the moon moved. I asked him what he meant by sharper. He said it has corners, like a triangle or a tooth, which was weird enough on its own, but the way he said it, again, just plain and calm, made it stick in my head. That night I checked outside after he went to bed. Nothing. The sky was clear. Full moon, stars. No weird lights, no reflections, no sounds. Our street is quiet, cul-de-sac, no through traffic. I even walked down the block to see if anything looked off from another angle. All normal. Then the next night, I was doing dishes after he went to bed, and I saw him standing in the hallway near the window. I called to him. He didn't answer. I dried my hands and walked over, and he was just staring out through a gap in the curtain. His face was blank, but he looked like he was concentrating. I asked what he was doing, and he said, "It's back, but it's not moving tonight." I looked out with him. I didn't see anything, just the moon over the neighbor's house and some light cloud cover. But then, just for a second, I saw something move. I don't know how to describe it exactly. It was like a glint, not a light, but a brightness in a specific shape. Not round, more like a bent corner. It was high up, not too far from the moon, and it didn't blink or shift like a plane or satellite. It was just there. Then it was gone. I asked him if that's what he meant. He nodded. "It hides when you see it," he said. That's when it stopped feeling like a kid's imagination. The next day, I went through his room, wondering if maybe the reflection from something in the house, some object or sticker or toy that might throw light at night. Nothing. I even laid in his bed at night and opened the curtains to try and see what he might be seeing. Again, nothing. The sky was empty, but he kept talking about it. Never scared, just watchful. One morning, he told me, "It got closer last night. It looked like it wanted to come down." I asked him how he knew that, and he said because the moon moved fast and it followed. That really got to me. He had no way of knowing the moon doesn't actually move in that way, not from his point of view. He didn't say it rose or set, he said it moved fast. And he wasn't smiling or trying to spook me, he just said it while he was brushing his teeth. I started making sure his window was fully shut and locked. No reason, just felt like I should. I even set up one of those cheap wildlife cameras in his room, pointing toward the window. Motion activated. I didn't tell him. I just wanted to see if I could catch headlights or animal something that might explain it. For 3 nights, nothing. Then on the 4th, the camera triggered 3 times between 2 and 2:10 a.m. I checked the footage. The first 2 clips were nothing, just the window and the edge of his bed. No movement, no sound. The 3rd clip, I don't know. The image glitched. It wasn't like a tech error. It was like a flash of light hit the lens, but only on one side. Like someone had a flashlight just barely in frame, but from above, outside the window. It lasted half a second, and then it was normal again. I checked outside in the morning. No footprints, no signs of animals. The window screen was fine, no damage. The weirdest part was that I couldn't stop thinking about that flash. It had the same color as the shape I thought I saw the night I stood with him. Not white, more silvery. Like bright metal in sunlight, except it was the middle of the night. I didn't tell him about the camera. I just started keeping his curtains closed all the time. He didn't argue. Then about a week later, things stopped. No more comments, no more watching the window. He started sleeping in again, stopped asking if I'd closed the curtains. I waited a couple days, then finally asked if he still saw the shape. He said no, it found someone else. I asked what he meant. He just shrugged and said, "It was looking. It's not looking here now." That was it. I took down the camera and went back to normal routines. But a few days after that conversation, I checked the footage one last time. Nothing new, but I noticed something I hadn't before. The glitch in that last clip? It wasn't just light. There was a shadow behind it. Not on the window, on the floor. For maybe 2 frames, there was a triangle-shaped shadow stretching across the carpet, pointing toward his bed. It didn't move, just appeared, then vanished. I deleted the clip. I used to climb onto the roof at night when I was a teenager. We had this low-sloped section over the garage with shingles worn down to the felt in spots. It was easy to get up there from the fence, and my parents either didn't notice or didn't care. I'd bring up a lawn chair sometimes, or just lie flat with my hoodie pulled tight around my face to keep the mosquitoes off. We lived on the edge of a small town, so if you looked west, past the cornfields, the stars came out pretty clear. It was one of those nights. Late summer, still hot even after dark. I was 16. Couldn't sleep, just restless. I brought a Coke up with me, no phone, no music. Just wanted to be away from everything for a while. I lay back and watched satellites for a while. I got good at spotting them. Faint white dots sliding slow across the sky, steady pace, no blinking. Sometimes I'd see one cross paths with a plane way up high, and I'd watch the difference. The way the plane had that rhythmic blink, the satellite didn't. That's what I thought I saw at first. Another satellite. Except this one was red. Tiny red light. Steady like a satellite, moving slow and smooth from south to north. I followed it with my eyes, trying to figure out if maybe it was just the color messing with me. Maybe it was a plane at a weird angle or catching the sunset high up. But the sun had been down for an hour and the light didn't blink. It just drifted. Smooth and silent. I kept watching it, waiting for it to fade behind the trees or dip below the roofline, but it didn't. Instead, it slowed down, like gradually came to a stop. Right above me. Not straight overhead, more like above and to the northwest, maybe 20 degrees up from the horizon. It just stopped, stayed completely still. I remember thinking maybe it was a helicopter, but there was no sound. Nothing. And it didn't move again. It just hovered there. I sat up, pulled my hoodie off, and leaned forward on my hands. It was so quiet. No wind, no bugs, no cars, not even a dog barking anywhere. That was probably the part that really got to me. The silence. Usually even at night, you hear something. I watched that red light for a long time. I didn't time it then, but I checked later against when I got back inside. It had to have been 10 minutes, maybe a little more. Just that dot sitting still against the stars. Then it vanished. Not like it faded out or blinked. It just popped. 1 second it was there, then there was this flash. Pure white light. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a quarter held at arm's length, and it didn't light up the neighborhood or anything, but it was sharp. Bright enough to make me squint. And then it was gone. No afterglow, no movement, just empty sky. I sat there frozen for a while. Tried to listen for something or spot something else in the sky, but there was nothing. The stars looked normal. A plane went by way off to the east, regular blinking lights. I waited until I saw another satellite drift through just to feel like something made sense again. Eventually I climbed down. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't sleep much that night. The next evening I went back up to look again. Watched the same patch of sky for an hour. Nothing weird happened. It never came back. I was the last one to leave the office that Friday night, driving home through a quiet part of town where the streetlights barely reached the sidewalks. It was early December, and the temperature had dropped enough that frost was forming on everything. Cars, windows, the roofs of buildings. When I pulled into my driveway, I was thinking only about getting inside and heating up some dinner. The night was so cold that the air felt almost heavy, like it was holding onto the cold instead of letting it go. I got out of the car and headed toward the trunk to grab my bag. That's when I noticed the windshield. At first, I thought it was just frost like any other night, But then I saw something odd. There were these tiny glowing dots arranged in a pattern across the glass. They didn't look random. They were lined up in neat rows and columns, almost like a grid or some kind of code. But the weird part was, they weren't just frost sparkling in the streetlight. These dots glowed faintly, a soft bluish light, almost like little stars trapped in the frost. I stood there for a moment, squinting to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The dots didn't move or change, but the glow was definitely there, and it didn't look natural. I went around to the driver's side and looked closer. The pattern stretched across the entire windshield, and if I tried, I could make out what looked like shapes or symbols formed by the dots, but they weren't letters or numbers I recognized. Just strange geometric figures, triangles, circles, intersecting lines, laid out perfectly straight. The frost itself looked untouched except for this pattern. I checked the hood and windows, but nothing else had those glowing dots. I ran my finger over the windshield carefully, expecting the frost to crumble or smear, but the pattern stayed intact. The frost was fragile all around it, but the glowing dots didn't move or disappear. It was like the pattern was embedded in the glass or frozen in place by something else. I told myself I must have missed it the night before, or maybe someone had done it as a prank. But then I remembered I had parked the car inside my garage last night and it was closed tight. No one else had access. I live alone, and the frost hadn't been there this morning. The whole thing felt off. I got inside and tried to shake it off. I pulled up a close photo on my phone, but the glow didn't show up in the picture at all. Just the frost, nothing unusual. I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dim light. I even tried shining my flashlight on the windshield, but the pattern didn't reflect or change. It just glowed faintly on its own. That night, I kept glancing out the window, expecting the pattern to vanish, but it was still there when I looked out before bed. The next morning, though, it was gone. The frost was normal, no glowing dots, nothing. I went out and wiped the windshield down just to be sure. For the next few nights, I watched my car carefully when I got home. Nothing like that ever showed up again. But the whole time, I had this weird feeling, like I was being watched, or that something was lingering just outside the edge of my vision. A couple of nights after I first saw the pattern, I was getting ready to leave for work early in the morning. The street outside was quiet, the sky still dark. I paused at the window and noticed a faint light flickering in the distance, low over the trees behind my house. It wasn't moving like a plane or a drone, just hanging there, pulsing softly in blue and white. I thought maybe it was a reflection or some kind of distant streetlight, but it felt different, like it wasn't supposed to be there. I grabbed my binoculars and looked toward the light. It was definitely a cluster of lights, but they weren't arranged like a planes, more like dots again. But this time they were moving slowly, shifting shape, almost like they were rearranging themselves. I watched for a few minutes, but then the lights just vanished all at once. No sound, no trail, like someone switched them off. That morning, I asked around at work if anyone else had seen anything strange, but no one had. People joked about the cold weather messing with my eyes, or how the stress of work was getting to me. Maybe they were right. But I knew what I'd seen. Over the next week, I kept catching glimpses of those dots in odd places. The reflection on a window, a pattern in the frost on a neighbor's car that disappeared before I could get close, even once on the sidewalk where some dew was sparkling weirdly. It was never the same pattern twice, but there was always something there that didn't belong. One night, I parked the car a little farther from home, on the street where the fog rolled in thick. When I came back, the windshield had another pattern of glowing dots. But this time they looked like a spiral, slowly fading at the edges. I didn't touch it, just stared until the glow dimmed and disappeared as the night air warmed. That was the last time it happened, but after that I started noticing a feeling like something was watching me, mostly when I was alone at home. The feeling was quiet, not violent or threatening, just persistent, like I wasn't really alone, even though I could see no one. I told a friend about it once, and they asked if I was sure I wasn't just tired or stressed. Maybe, but it felt too real, like a message left just for me, but I couldn't figure out what it meant. Sometimes late at night, when everything was still, I'd glance out at the car and swear I could see the faintest glow coming from the windshield again, just enough to catch my attention before it disappeared. I never figured out what those glowing dots were or why they appeared, but they changed something. The nights didn't feel quite normal anymore, and neither did I. It happened about 3 years ago when I was doing overnight work for the state highway department. We were resurfacing a stretch of 2-lane out near Ridgeway, way out in the middle of nowhere. It was a weeknight, maybe Wednesday. Clear sky, no traffic. We worked from 9 p.m. to about 4 a.m., and most nights were dead quiet. That night was like any other. Warm, dry, no wind. Moon was maybe half full, and stars were sharp. We had cones set up along a quarter-mile stretch with floodlights at either end. I was manning the far side where the crew trucks were parked, mostly just directing equipment in and out, keeping an eye on things. Not exactly thrilling work, but I liked the quiet. Around midnight, I stepped away from the lights to take a leak behind the equipment trailer. I was maybe 50 feet from the road, facing the trees. That's when I noticed how still everything was. No bugs, no wind, not even the usual hum from the field beyond the tree line. Just dead quiet. As I zipped up, I saw a shadow move across the gravel near my feet. At first, I thought it was just clouds, but there weren't any. Sky was completely clear. I looked up, half expecting a bird or low-flying plane. Nothing, not even a single wisp of cloud. Just stars. But the shadow was real. It wasn't fast. It sort of glided across the road from west to east, smooth and slow. Covered the width of the highway, probably wider. There was no noise, no wind, no vibration. I remember that clearly because I just stood there waiting for something. A sound, a breeze, anything. But it was silent. I watched it cross over the floodlight beams and disappear into the trees on the other side. It was shaped long and irregular, not round or winged. Kind of like the outline of something huge but not solid, like a very faint, dark filter moving between me and the stars. Once it passed, everything stayed still. No animals, no wind. It didn't leave anything behind, not even a breeze, and the air felt heavy somehow. Not cold, just weighted. I stood there for a long time. I remember checking my watch, thinking maybe 5 minutes had gone by, but it had only been 1. I walked back to the road slowly, scanning the sky the whole time. Still nothing. I asked one of the other guys if he'd seen anything, but he just shrugged. Said I probably saw a bat or something. But it wasn't that. Bats don't throw shadows like that, and I know what planes sound like. This was something else. The next weird thing didn't happen until maybe an hour later. I was sitting in the truck, half dozing, when the radio clicked on for a second. Just static, and then shut off again. We hadn't used the radios all night, and they're usually pretty solid. I looked at the handheld sitting in the charger, and the screen was blank, like it had been turned off, even though I hadn't touched it. Right after that, I heard a soft metallic clank from behind the trailer. Not loud, just one of those small, deliberate sounds, someone dropping a wrench onto pavement. I got out and checked. Walked the whole length of the trailer. No one there. Nothing had fallen. Everything was right where it should have been. When I came back around, I noticed something else. The gravel right near where I'd been earlier, where I saw the shadow, looked kind of off, like the rocks had been disturbed, but only in a narrow, straight band, maybe a foot wide. The rest of the gravel was dry and dusty, but this strip looked like it had been tamped down and pressed smooth, almost melted together. I bent down to touch it. It wasn't warm, just firmer, like the surface had been compressed. I didn't tell anyone, didn't feel like trying to explain that. I just stayed in the truck for the rest of the shift, door locked, radio off. The weirdest part happened on the drive home. I finished up around 4:15, got in my truck, and started heading south on Route 12, which runs through open farmland. Just as I was coming up over a low hill, maybe 10 minutes from the site, the headlights picked up something on the left side of the road. It was a shape, tall, thin, not moving. I slowed down, thinking it was a deer or a person. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't either. It looked like a narrow post or figure, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, standing just inside the ditch. I passed it slowly, maybe 20 miles per hour, trying to get a better look without stopping. It didn't move. I only saw it for about 3 seconds, but I couldn't make out any details. Just a tall, vertical shape, dull gray, no shine or reflection. I checked my rear view, but the road behind me was empty. Nothing standing there anymore. That stretch of road has no turnoffs, no fences, nowhere something could hide. I drove home the rest of the way with the windows up and the radio off. The next day, I went back out to the site around noon just to see if the gravel still looked weird. It didn't. The whole area looked normal, like nothing had happened. The radio in the truck worked fine too. I didn't bring it up again with the crew. Nothing else weird happened that week, but I stopped volunteering for the Ridgeway shift after that. It was a Tuesday night, early spring. I remember because the windows were open and it was just warm enough not to need a jacket inside. I live out on about 12 acres just outside of town. Nothing fancy, old farmhouse, gravel driveway, big backyard that slopes down toward a tree line. You can see a long way out here. No streetlights, no neighbors in sight, just stars and silence most nights. I'd finished dinner and was cleaning up the kitchen. It was around 9, maybe a little after. The sky was already good and dark. I went out onto the porch with a glass of iced tea and sat on the swing like I usually do. The air smelled like cut grass and damp dirt. Real still. No wind, no crickets, nothing. That's what struck me first. The silence. I didn't notice it at the time because it didn't feel strange at first, but later I realized how quiet it had been. Like the whole yard was holding its breath. I was just staring up, spacing out, like I do. Then I noticed something was different. I don't know how to explain it exactly. My eyes weren't focusing right. There was a spot in the sky that seemed flatter, like a patch that didn't shift when I blinked or moved my head. It was directly above the house. At first I thought maybe it was a cloud, but there weren't any that night. You could see everything, every star, except in that spot. It wasn't black exactly, just empty. I stood up off the swing and took a few steps out into the yard. I tilted my head back and stared at it. It was a triangle, long, thin, with rounded corners. Just sitting there, not moving. No sound, no lights. And the weirdest part was I could still see the stars through it. Sort of. Like they were being projected or mimicked, but slightly off. One of the stars inside the shape blinked out for a split second, then came back. That's how I saw the outline. It didn't block out the sky, it didn't cast a shadow, but it was there. I stood there staring at it for maybe 30 seconds, not breathing, not moving. Then I blinked, and it was gone. Just not there anymore. No movement, no fading. 1 second it was overhead, and the next the sky was normal again. I stayed out there for a while, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. I walked around the yard. I even looked at the ground, thinking maybe there'd be some kind of imprint or disturbance. Nothing. I went inside eventually, but I didn't sleep much. Every sound made me jump. I kept checking the windows. Around 3 a.m., the power went out for about 5 minutes. No wind, no storm, just off and back on. My phone battery drained fast that night too. I plugged it in when I went to bed, and it was at 9% when I checked it at 4:30. 2 days later, I found one of my outdoor motion lights on the back shed had shattered. No sign of impact, no rocks or anything. Just the bulb cracked in its housing. I didn't hear anything when it would have happened. I didn't tell anyone at first. Then about a week later, I mentioned it to a guy I know from the feed store. Older guy, lives about 4 miles down the road. He looked at me real quiet for a second and then said, "You see it too?" I asked what he meant, and he just shook his head and said never mind. He wouldn't talk about it after that. A few nights after that, I woke up around 2 a.m. with this weird pressure in my ears. Not pain exactly, more like when you drive up a mountain and your ears don't pop right. I got up, walked around, checked the house. Everything looked normal. I stepped outside just to make sure the dogs hadn't knocked something over, and it hit me again. The silence. That unnatural kind where you can't hear anything, not even your own footsteps, right? I didn't see anything that time, but I felt like something was there. I don't know where. Just somewhere above, watching. I stood outside for maybe 10 minutes, waiting for something to move, but it didn't. Eventually, I went back in. The pressure in my ears faded after a couple hours. Since then, nothing else like that's happened. No more shapes in the sky. But I noticed little things now. The way the dogs sometimes bark at corners of the yard where there's nothing. The way my porch light flickers every so often, even after I replace the bulb. My phone still dies fast when I'm out in the yard too long at night. I've gone out on the porch every clear night since then, looking, haven't seen it again. But I keep thinking about how it didn't move, didn't hum, didn't shine, just sat there, wrong, like a piece of the sky that didn't belong. Like something pretending to be nothing. I was out for my usual early morning jog, the kind where the sun's not quite up yet, but the sky's starting to lighten a bit. It was late summer, and the air had that damp, cool feel you get just before dawn. I like running before the world wakes up. Quiet, nothing around except the road, some trees, and the occasional field. That morning, I was on a stretch where the road runs along this big cornfield. I'd passed it dozens of times, but something about that day felt different. I was maybe a quarter mile in when I noticed it. A silver sphere, just hovering a few feet above the corn stalks. Not moving, not making a sound. It wasn't high up like a balloon or drone, but low enough that if I'd walked into the field, I could have touched it. At first, I thought it might be some kind of weather balloon or an experimental drone, but it wasn't moving at all. Just hanging there, perfectly still. The surface was smooth, reflective like chrome, but dull, not shiny or polished. I stopped running and stared for a few seconds, trying to figure out if I was imagining it or if it was some weird trick of the light. There were no blinking lights or anything mechanical about it. No wires, no support holding it up. The corn around it didn't move either. No wind or breeze. The whole thing felt off, like something out of place. I thought about pulling my phone out to take a picture, but the screen was dead. Battery was fine the night before, but it wouldn't turn on. Figured maybe the cold had something to do with it, so I shoved it back in my pocket and kept looking. The sky was brightening slowly, and as the sun crept closer to the horizon, the sphere started to fade. Not by moving away or anything, but just becoming less solid, like it was flickering out of existence. I blinked a couple of times, but when I looked back, it was gone. I wasn't sure how long I stood there. The silence was heavy, but there was no sound coming from the sphere, no humming or buzzing like you'd expect from a drone or machine, just the regular early morning quiet, maybe the distant call of a bird or something. I started running again, trying to shake the weird feeling, but it stuck with me. When I got home, I told my wife what I'd seen, but she just gave me that look like I was making it up, or maybe I'd been half asleep. I didn't blame her. It sounded crazy. I checked my phone. Battery was fine again. No idea why it died just then. I tried to find news or anything online about some weird event, but nothing. I kept thinking about it all day. The strange quiet, the way it just hung there and then disappeared. I went back to that spot in the afternoon to see if I could find anything left behind. The field looked normal at first, tall, green corn standing straight, but then I noticed a patch near the edge, right where the sphere had been. The corn was completely flattened, like someone had pressed down on it hard, but it wasn't random. It was a perfect rectangle, sharp edges, straight lines, looked almost like someone had taken a giant stamp and pressed it down. The stalks weren't broken or snapped. They were just lying flat, all pointing the same way, like they'd been carefully pushed over. I walked around it, feeling the ground. It was dry, no footprints or tire tracks. The soil wasn't disturbed beyond the flattened corn. No signs of fire, no scorch marks or anything else unusual, just that strange patch in the middle of the field. I took a few photos with my phone. No weird light streaks or glitches this time, just the rectangle of flattened corn. I told a neighbor about it, an older guy who's lived around there forever. He said he hadn't noticed anything the night before or that morning. No planes or helicopters, no noise or flashing lights. He didn't believe in that stuff, but admitted it was odd. That night, I kept thinking about the sphere and the field. I felt like I was being watched for a while, but when I looked outside, nothing was there. No cars, no shadows moving near the house. The next few days, I checked the field every morning. The flattened patch stayed the same. No new damage, no signs anyone had been near it. The rest of the corn grew like normal, untouched. I don't know what I saw that morning or what made the field look like that. It's still out there, the rectangle of flat corn, just a few feet from the road. People drive by it, but no one talks about it much. Sometimes I wonder if I should go back, see if the sphere ever comes back, but I don't know if I want to. I was coming in for a landing at a small regional airport one evening, about an hour before sunset. The sky was clear, and the whole flight had been uneventful until the final approach. I was flying a single-engine prop plane, nothing fancy, just enough to get me from point A to B. As I lined up with the runway, I glanced out the left window and saw something that threw me off. There was another plane, or at least it looked like one. It was hovering just above the runway, maybe 50 feet up, perfectly still. No movement, no engine noise. It was kind of hard to make out details at first because it was dusk, but the shape was definitely a plane, a small one, with wings and what looked like a tail. At first, I thought maybe the tower had cleared another plane to land, and I hadn't been told, so I radioed in. Ground control, this is Cessna 3571. I have a plane holding just above the runway. Can you confirm? There was a crackle, then the voice came back clear. Cessna 3571. We have no other aircraft on final or in the pattern. Runway is clear for landing. I blinked, checked my instruments, looked back out the window. The shape was still there. It didn't move or change in any way. I started to wonder if I was seeing things or if it was some kind of weird reflection, but the shape's outline was too distinct, too steady, and it definitely wasn't a drone or a balloon or anything I'd seen before. I radioed again. Ground control, you're sure? There's definitely something holding just above the runway. It looks like a plane, but it's not responding. No lights or anything. Negative, Cessna 3571. No traffic on or near the runway. You're cleared to land. I nodded to myself, but I kept staring out the window. The thing was just hovering there, motionless. Then I noticed something else. There was no sound. No engine noise, no wind disturbance, nothing. Just silence. I started my descent carefully. The whole time I had this feeling like I was being watched, but when I glanced away, there was nothing unusual in the cockpit. I tapped the mic again, trying to get someone to confirm what I was seeing, but the tower repeated the same thing. No traffic, runway clear. As I got closer, I noticed the shape started to look less and less like a plane. The edges were kind of blurry, almost like it was shifting or melting into the air around it. It wasn't reflecting light like a solid object either. It was darker than the sky, but not like a shadow, more like an absence of light. I slowed my approach, preparing to go around if needed, but the object didn't move. I figured maybe I should just land and let whoever was on the ground check it out. I touched down smoothly, rolled to a stop near the taxiway, and shut down the engine. As soon as I turned off the radio, I glanced back toward the runway. The shape was gone. No trace, no disturbance, nothing. Curious and a bit unsettled, I walked over to the tower to ask if anyone else had reported seeing anything. The guy in the tower looked at me like I'd lost it. Nope, nothing unusual. We monitor everything, and there were no aircraft at all besides you. I checked with the other pilots on the ground, but nobody else had seen anything either. It was like the thing had only appeared to me. Later, while I was getting my bags, I heard from a mechanic that the security cameras near the runway had footage that was weird, just static for a few minutes during the time I was on final approach. The cameras cut out and came back on with no explanation. I asked if I could see the footage, but the mechanic said it was glitchy and not worth looking at. I kept thinking about the shape, how it wasn't quite a plane, how it hovered perfectly still and silent. It didn't behave like anything mechanical I'd seen. I called the airport the next day, hoping to get a better explanation, but all they said was maybe it was a weather balloon or some kind of optical illusion, but that didn't fit. Balloons don't hover still, and I'm used to flying in weird weather conditions. The whole thing has stuck with me. I don't know what I saw, and I don't expect to ever find out, but every time I fly into that airport, I can't help but look out the window, half expecting that shape to be waiting there again. I was working on a line repair job in a remote part of the Cascades, way off the main road, maybe 15 miles from the nearest town. One of those spots you can't drive to. We hiked the gear in over a couple miles of old logging trail. No cell signal, no houses, just forest and mountains. I'd been out there for 3 days, solo, clearing limbs and inspecting hardware after a storm knocked out a stretch of feeder lines. The job itself was routine. Nothing too damaged, just slow work. Climb, inspect, clear, repeat. I'd camp nearby and work through the daylight. I'd done a few of these before. Not fun, but peaceful in a way. Quiet. You start to feel like the woods are your whole world. The weird stuff started on the second morning. I woke up and went to grab my multi-tool from the rock I'd left it on by the tent, and it stuck slightly to my hand when I picked it up. Just a small tug, like static cling or something, but it was enough to make me stop and check. When I set it back down on the rock, it kind of twitched and slid a little toward my hand as I hovered over it. I didn't think magnetism at first. I thought maybe I was overtired or the rock was sloped or something. But later, when I clipped the tool onto my belt, I noticed my wrench sticking slightly to the back of my glove, and my spare carabiner felt weirdly hard to pull off my harness loop, like it was caught on something. By the time I got up the first pole that morning, the little nuts and bolts I'd brought in a side pouch were clumping together inside it like they'd all been magnetized. It was subtle, but definitely not normal. My gloves started picking up fine metal shavings from my file like they were dust. At one point, I set my screwdriver on a rock, and it stayed upright, wobbling just slightly, like it had been pulled into place. None of my electronics were acting up. The voltmeter was reading fine. My headlamp still worked, but the magnetism thing kept happening throughout the day. I'd stop working and try to test it, just out of curiosity. Sometimes things would stick, sometimes not, but it kept happening just enough to feel off. And it was only with the tools I'd brought with me, not the metal on the poles or the line hardware. That night, I sat in the camp with my headlamp off, just watching the sky while I ate. It was clear, full of stars, cool breeze, absolutely silent. Then I saw this brief flash, maybe half a second long, way up high above the trees. Not like lightning, more like a camera flash behind a thin sheet. No sound, nothing followed it. I figured maybe a meteor or distant plane catching sunlight. I waited for more, but that was it. The next morning, the magnetism was gone. Tools acted normal, nothing stuck together. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Went back to work like usual. But around midday, I started noticing something up in the canopy. I was on a slope that gave me a good angle up through the trees, and at first I thought it was just sun glare or weird bark patterns. But there were shapes in the treetops, faint but real. Circles, mostly, but not natural-looking ones. Too perfect. Some of them overlapped in precise arcs, like stencils. And they weren't carved or broken branches. They looked more like discoloration, like the needles themselves had been lightly scorched. I climbed up one of the poles to get a better view. From higher up, I could see more of them, spread across maybe a quarter mile of canopy. Just faint rings and intersecting lines, maybe 20 feet wide each, like some kind of pattern had been traced across the forest from above. Not burned deep, just singed enough to change the color of the leaves. You wouldn't notice from the ground unless you were really looking. I started to feel really uneasy then. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anyone, but I kept catching myself turning around like I'd heard a branch snap, or like someone had walked up behind me. Every few minutes I'd stop and just listen. Total silence, but it felt heavy, like the air was waiting. I finished out the day early, packed up, and radioed in. No response, but that wasn't unusual in that area. I decided I'd hike out the next morning and call from the truck. That night, I couldn't sleep. The tent felt too exposed, even with the rain fly zipped and my headlamp within reach. Around 2 or 3 a.m., I stepped outside to piss and just stood there for a while, trying to get my nerves under control. That's when I saw the glow. It was coming from deeper in the woods. Not bright, more like a soft dome of light, filtered through the trees, pale bluish white, not flickering like firelight, not moving like a flashlight. It just sat there. I couldn't see a source, just this hazy illumination maybe 200 yards out low to the ground. I crouched and watched it for a long time. It didn't move, didn't change. It was dead silent. No insects, no wind, no animal sounds. I thought about going toward it, but I couldn't get my legs to move. At some point, I must have gone back into the tent because I woke up fully dressed with my boots on. stiff from sleeping half sitting against the side wall. It was morning. Gray light through the trees. The glow was gone. I packed everything as fast as I could, skipped breakfast, and hiked out in just over an hour. On the drive back, I kept checking the rear view, like something was going to come up behind me on the road. Nothing ever did. I turned the gear in back at the depot and didn't say anything about what I saw. The magnetic stuff was gone by then. The tools were normal. I don't even know how I would have explained the treetop markings without sounding like a lunatic. A few weeks later, I checked satellite maps of the area, just out of curiosity. No clearings or structures where I'd seen the light. Nothing but trees. I zoomed in as far as I could, but the resolution wasn't good enough to make anything out. I haven't taken another solo job since. I was driving home late one night through the mountain pass. It was one of those thick fog nights where everything feels quieter, like the world's been wrapped up in cotton. I'd left a friend's place pretty late, maybe around midnight, and the roads were empty except for me. The fog had been creeping in for a while, first just a little mist, then it got thicker the farther up the road I went. The pass is this winding stretch with steep cliffs on one side and dense trees on the other. There aren't many streetlights, just the occasional reflector post along the guardrail. I was doing about 40, careful with the slick road and low visibility. The fog made everything blurry and muted. Sounds were dull, headlights looked like fuzzy halos, and the trees all around looked like shadows. I remember the first weird thing was the headlights. I was coming around a bend and saw a pair of bright lights up ahead, just sitting there. At first, I thought it was a car stopped on the side, maybe someone broken down or pulled over. But the more I looked, the less it made sense. The headlights were about 50 feet off the ground. They were just hanging there. No body of a car underneath or around them. No tires, no outline, nothing. I slowed down, squinting through the fog, trying to figure out what I was seeing. The lights stayed perfectly still, not blinking or moving, just hovering maybe 100 feet ahead and definitely off the road. They were too high up to be normal headlights. They were just floating. I blinked a few times and adjusted my rearview mirror to check behind me. No other cars, no follow lights. Just my truck's dim taillights, disappearing into the fog behind. I kept driving, slow and steady, but the headlights stayed there, just floating in the fog like some weird street decoration someone had put up. I wasn't thinking about aliens or anything like that, just how odd and out of place it was. As I got closer, the fog seemed thicker around the lights. The air felt heavier. The lights flickered a little, not like a bulb going out, more like a pulse. They dimmed and brightened rhythmically, slow and even. I caught my breath, realizing this wasn't normal at all. I glanced down at the dashboard and noticed my phone had lost signal. No bars, no notifications, nothing. I tried to call my friend back, but the call didn't connect. It was like the fog was swallowing all signals too. I passed under the lights slowly, keeping my eyes on the road, but feeling like I was being watched. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the truck's heater struggled against the chill. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The lights stayed above me for maybe a minute. I'm not sure how long. It felt like forever and no time at all. When I finally looked up through the windshield, I saw the headlights fade out all at once, just gone. No flicker, no fade, just nothing. Right after, the fog thinned and the normal yellow streetlights down the road flickered back on. The air warmed up a bit. I looked in the rearview mirror again, but there was nothing behind me. No floating lights, no cars. I kept driving, but the feeling didn't leave me. The silence was too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Every time I glanced at the spot where the lights had been, I half expected them to pop back into view. Once I got down to the valley and the fog cleared, the radio buzzed back to life. My phone started picking up signal again. Nothing else happened on the drive home. The roads were just roads, the trees just trees. I still think about those lights sometimes. What I saw or thought I saw. There's no clear explanation, no car, no reflection, no wires, just headlights floating in the fog, totally detached from anything real. It didn't chase me or do anything, just hung there, watching. I drove that pass a few times since then, late at night, but I haven't seen anything like that again. I was coming in for the last pass of the day, just finishing up spraying the far edge of the wheat field before heading back to the barn. The sun was low, just starting to dip behind the hills, so the light was golden and long, everything looking warmer and a bit softer than usual. It was the kind of evening where you almost don't want to stop flying. I'd done the field 3 or 4 times that afternoon, nothing unusual. The plane was steady, the spray system working fine, and the only sound was the drone of the engine and the wind. My routine was tight: line up low, keep the speed steady, spray, then climb out, turn around, and start again. I was halfway through the pass when something shifted. I was maybe 50 feet above the wheat, eyes scanning the ground to make sure the coverage was even, when I noticed this weird shimmer across the field below, like heat waves on asphalt, but cooler, not the usual heat distortion. The wheat stalks looked bent, like a ripple moving through the crops, but there was no wind. The air was still, quiet except for the engine. It moved fast, gliding beneath me from one side of the field to the other, like a wave that folded the wheat down, then lifted it back up. I couldn't see a shape, no shadow or outline, just the effect it had on the plants. The ground looked like it was breathing or shifting under the surface. It was huge, way bigger than any animal or machine I knew of. Way bigger than a truck or a tractor, for sure. I banked a little to get a better look, but the distortion moved with me, staying just out of sight, sliding beneath the field like something massive passing just under the surface. No sound. Nothing except the wheat bending in slow waves, folding and unfolding. I checked my altimeter. Steady, no turbulence. The plane was steady, but my heart started racing. This wasn't normal. I pulled up slightly, trying to get above it, but the shimmer didn't go away. It just kept moving, drifting slowly toward the east edge of the field. I couldn't tell how deep it was, or even if it was underwater. There wasn't any water nearby, just dirt and crops. Then the whole field kind of flickered, like the distortion hit a wall or an edge. The wheat snapped back upright all at once, like someone flipped a switch. The wave was gone. No ripple, no shimmer, just the regular golden stalks stretching out under the fading light. I circled around, looking for any sign of what I'd just seen. No tracks, no machinery, no animals. Nothing that could have made that kind of movement without noise or visible shape. I scanned the horizon. Clear sky, no clouds, no birds, no drones or other planes. The radio was dead quiet. I thought about calling the farm, telling someone what I'd seen, but the words felt stupid. What would I even say? Hey! Something big passed under my plane, but I couldn't see it. It sounded crazy even in my head. I finished the pass, a little shaken, then headed back to land. The wheat field looked normal, peaceful, like nothing had happened. I checked my phone when I got out. No missed calls, no messages. The sun was gone, replaced by the cold blue of early evening. That night, I kept replaying what I'd seen. The way the wheat bent, the slow pulse of the distortion, the silence. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light, or a weird heat mirage, but it didn't fit. I've been flying crops for years. I've seen all kinds of strange weather and odd reflections, but nothing like this. The next day, I went back to the field with a couple of the farmhands. We walked the area where the distortion had passed. No tracks, no broken stalks, no signs that anything heavy had moved through there recently. The dirt was dry and hard, no disturbance. A week later, I flew the same field again, same time of day. The wheat was taller now, waving in the breeze like usual. I kept an eye out for anything odd but saw nothing. No shimmer, no waves, no ripples. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but I know what I saw. Something massive, moving beneath the surface, invisible except for the way it changed the wheat. I don't know what it was, and I'm not sure I want to. But it was real enough to throw off my landing and make me feel like I was flying over something I wasn't supposed to see. I had been tracking the flock for over a week. The species was rare, some kind of migratory bird that only passed through the region once a year. I had seen them once before, years back, but never in numbers like this. They had settled in a remote area of the reserve, miles from any roads or trails. It took me 2 days just to hike out there, carrying my gear and a small tent. The birds were easy to spot. Their feathers caught the sunlight in a way that made them almost shimmer, and their calls were sharp and high, like nothing else I'd ever heard. I'd set up camp near the edge of a clearing where they roosted. Every morning, I watched them take off in a synchronized burst, hundreds of them moving together like a single organism. It was mesmerizing. That morning was no different at first. The air was cool, the sky a pale gray, and the forest around me was still waking up. I had my binoculars ready, scanning the trees, waiting for the flock to stir. When they did, it was sudden, like a switch had been flipped. One moment, they were still. The next, they were airborne, rising in a massive, twisting spiral above the clearing. I was about to grab my camera when I noticed something strange. The birds weren't moving the way they usually did. Instead of spreading out and heading toward the river, they were climbing higher and higher into the sky, circling tighter and tighter, like they were being pulled toward something. At first, I thought it was just an odd behavior, maybe a predator nearby. But then I saw it. The object was hovering just above the treetops, so still it almost blended into the clouds. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a small car, but it didn't look like anything I'd ever seen. It was smooth and featureless, a dull metallic gray that seemed to shift slightly when I tried to focus on it. There were no lights, no sound, nothing to indicate how it was staying in the air. It was just there, motionless, as if it had always been part of the sky. The birds were drawn to it. One by one, they broke from the spiral and flew straight toward the object. I watched through my binoculars as they disappeared into its surface, vanishing without a trace. There was no impact, no reaction from the object. It was like they were being absorbed. The sight made my stomach churn, but I couldn't look away. I tried to convince myself it was some kind of natural phenomenon, maybe an atmospheric mirage or a strange cloud formation, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was nothing natural about the way the birds moved or the way the object seemed to pulse faintly, like it was alive. I didn't know what to do. I thought about running, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I thought about grabbing my camera, but the idea of moving, of drawing attention to myself, felt wrong. So I just stood there, frozen, watching as the last of the flock disappeared into the object. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the object began to rise. It moved so smoothly, so effortlessly that it didn't seem real. It climbed higher and higher until it was nothing more than a speck in the sky. And then it was gone, swallowed by the clouds. The forest was silent. The birds were gone, and with them, the usual sounds of the morning. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. I stood there for what felt like hours, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I packed up my gear and started the long hike back to the ranger station. I didn't look back, and I didn't stop until I was safely inside. I thought about reporting what I'd seen, but what would I say? That a flock of rare birds had been taken by a hovering, silent craft? No one would believe me. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, lying. I haven't been back to that part of the reserve since. The thought of it makes my skin crawl. Sometimes late at night, I can still hear the birds' sharp, high calls in my mind. And sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, wherever that thing took them. I was coming in for a landing at a small regional airport one evening, about an hour before sunset. The sky was clear, and the whole flight had been uneventful until the final approach. I was flying a single-engine prop plane, nothing fancy, just enough to get me from point A to B. As I lined up with the runway, I glanced out the left window and saw something that threw me off. There was another plane, or at least it looked like one. It was hovering just above the runway, maybe 50 feet up, perfectly still. No movement, no engine noise. It was kind of hard to make out details at first because it was dusk, but the shape was definitely a plane, a small one, with wings and what looked like a tail. At first, I thought maybe the tower had cleared another plane to land, and I hadn't been told, so I radioed in. Ground control, this is Cessna 3571. I have a plane holding just above the runway. Can you confirm? There was a crackle, then the voice came back clear. Cessna 3571. We have no other aircraft on final or in the pattern. Runway is clear for landing. I blinked, checked my instruments, looked back out the window. The shape was still there. It didn't move or change in any way. I started to wonder if I was seeing things or if it was some kind of weird reflection, but the shape's outline was too distinct, too steady, and it definitely wasn't a drone or a balloon or anything I'd seen before. I radioed again. Ground control, you're sure? There's definitely something holding just above the runway. It looks like a plane, but it's not responding. No lights or anything. Negative, Cessna 3571. No traffic on or near the runway. You're cleared to land. I nodded to myself, but I kept staring out the window. The thing was just hovering there, motionless. Then I noticed something else. There was no sound. No engine noise, no wind disturbance, nothing. Just silence. I started my descent carefully. The whole time I had this feeling like I was being watched, but when I glanced away, there was nothing unusual in the cockpit. I tapped the mic again, trying to get someone to confirm what I was seeing, but the tower repeated the same thing. No traffic, runway clear. As I got closer, I noticed the shape started to look less and less like a plane. The edges were kind of blurry, almost like it was shifting or melting into the air around it. It wasn't reflecting light like a solid object either. It was darker than the sky, but not like a shadow, more like an absence of light. I slowed my approach, preparing to go around if needed, but the object didn't move. I figured maybe I should just land and let whoever was on the ground check it out. I touched down smoothly, rolled to a stop near the taxiway, and shut down the engine. As soon as I turned off the radio, I glanced back toward the runway. The shape was gone. No trace, no disturbance, nothing. Curious and a bit unsettled, I walked over to the tower to ask if anyone else had reported seeing anything. The guy in the tower looked at me like I'd lost it. Nope, nothing unusual. We monitor everything, and there were no aircraft at all besides you. I checked with the other pilots on the ground, but nobody else had seen anything either. It was like the thing had only appeared to me. Later, while I was getting my bags, I heard from a mechanic that the security cameras near the runway had footage that was weird, just static for a few minutes during the time I was on final approach. The cameras cut out and came back on with no explanation. I asked if I could see the footage, but the mechanic said it was glitchy and not worth looking at. I kept thinking about the shape, how it wasn't quite a plane, how it hovered perfectly still and silent. It didn't behave like anything mechanical I'd seen. I called the airport the next day, hoping to get a better explanation, but all they said was maybe it was a weather balloon or some kind of optical illusion, but that didn't fit. Balloons don't hover still, and I'm used to flying in weird weather conditions. The whole thing has stuck with me. I don't know what I saw, and I don't expect to ever find out. But every time I fly into that airport, I can't help but look out the window, half expecting that shape to be waiting there again. I saw it the first time on a Monday night. I was driving back from my sister's place just outside of town, maybe around 10:30 or so. There's this stretch of road, Willow Creek Road, that runs past a bunch of farmland. Not a lot of traffic, no street lights, just fence and field on both sides for about a mile. I was coming around the bend where the trees open up, and I noticed this light hovering over one of the fields on the right. At first, I thought it was a drone. It wasn't moving much, just kind of floating there, glowing pale yellow with this weird bluish edge to it. Too high to be farm equipment, too low to be a star or a plane. It didn't blink or flash, just held steady, maybe 20 feet above the ground. It wasn't super bright, didn't hurt to look at, but it had this strange soft pulse to it, almost like it was breathing. I slowed down without really thinking and pulled over to the side. I watched it for maybe a minute. No sound, no movement. The cows in the field were all bunched up at the far end, standing completely still. That part stuck with me for some reason, just how still they were. Normally they don't care about anything, but they were all staring in the same direction. Not at the light, but away from it. After a while, I kept driving. When I looked back in the mirror, the light was still there, just hovering. The next night, I went back. I don't know why exactly. Curiosity, I guess. I told myself I just wanted to see if it was still there. It was. Same place, same height, just sitting over the field like before. I parked in the same spot and watched for longer this time, maybe 10-15 minutes. Again, nothing happened. No movement, no noise. It didn't waver, didn't flicker. I even turned my car off at one point to listen. Still nothing. After the third night, I started to feel uneasy. It was always the same. Same time, same place, same glow. It never got closer or farther, never changed shape or color. There's something about that kind of consistency that doesn't feel right when it comes to things in the sky. You expect weather balloons or drones or even stars to shift a little, drift, change with the wind. This thing didn't. On the fourth night, I brought binoculars. Cheap ones from my dad's garage, nothing fancy. I parked again, leaned over the steering wheel, and focused in on it. All I could make out was the shape, round, or maybe a little flattened, like an oval, with that same glow. No propellers, no wings, no lights underneath, no markings. It looked almost too clean, like it wasn't reflecting light so much as making its own. That night I noticed something else. The sound in the car dropped when I pointed the binoculars at it, like the hum of the engine and the wind just dulled down for a few seconds. I thought I was imagining it, but it happened again when I tried a second time. Just a few seconds of this muffled silence. Then everything went back to normal. I didn't sleep well that night. Kept waking up thinking I heard something in the yard, but it was just the wind, or maybe the cat. I didn't get up to check. By the fifth night, I told myself I wasn't going back, but I did. This time I parked a little closer, down by the gate to the field. There was a dirt path leading in, and I walked maybe 20 feet in with a flashlight. The beam didn't go far, the air felt heavy, and the light just kind of stopped short in the fog that had rolled in. I couldn't see the object anymore from that angle, but I knew it was above me somewhere. I could feel it, like this faint pressure on my chest. The cows weren't there anymore. That spooked me more than I expected. I hadn't seen any trailers or trucks come through during the week. And there weren't tire tracks in the dirt. Just gone. When I turned to go back to the car, the flashlight flickered. Not out completely, just a few stutters. Same with the headlights when I got back in. I didn't stick around that time. I drove off a little faster than I needed to. Friday I stayed home, tried to distract myself with TV, but I kept checking the clock. Around 10:30, the power flickered. Once, then again. Just for a second. Enough to reset the microwave clock. I live 5 miles from that field. Maybe a coincidence. Saturday night, I drove out again. I don't know what I was expecting. I think I just needed to see if it was still there. It wasn't. The light was gone. Nothing in the sky, no glow, no hum. The field was completely dark, and there was this low mist hanging over the grass. I figured maybe I'd missed it, or it had moved on. I sat there for a while anyway, rolled the windows down. The air smelled different, kind of metallic, like when you leave batteries in a drawer too long. There was this faint crackling sound, like static, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It wasn't the car. I shut the engine off and it kept going. Real quiet, like it was out in the grass somewhere. I didn't get out that time. The next morning, I drove past on my way into town, and the field looked wrong. From the road, it was hard to tell, but the grass had this grayish tint to it, kind of flat. I pulled over and walked to the fence. The whole field was scorched, not burned exactly. There weren't any blackened spots or ash piles, but everything looked dead. The grass was dry and brittle. The dirt was pale and cracked. No footprints, no tire marks, no animal tracks. Just this big dead space, all the way across, like it had been drained of something. I called the county office that afternoon and asked if they'd done a controlled burn out there. The guy on the phone said no. They hadn't issued any burn permits for that area. He asked if I'd seen smoke, and I told him no, it didn't look burned, just scorched. He didn't seem too interested. There weren't any storms that week, no lightning, no fires, nothing on the news. I checked every day. The farmer never came out to mow it. The cows didn't come back. I've driven past that field maybe a dozen times since during the day. It hasn't grown back. The rest of the area looks fine. Normal green pasture, wildflowers, trees, but that one field's just stayed gray and empty, like it was peeled off the land and put back wrong. I stopped going by at night. It happened about 3 years ago when I was doing overnight work for the State Highway Department. We were resurfacing a stretch of 2-lane out near Ridgeway, way out in the middle of nowhere. It was a weeknight, maybe Wednesday. Clear sky, no traffic. We worked from 9 p.m. to about 4 a.m., and most nights were dead quiet. That night was like any other. Warm, dry, no wind. Moon was maybe half full and stars were sharp. We had cones set up along a quarter-mile stretch with floodlights at either end. I was manning the far side where the crew trucks were parked, mostly just directing equipment in and out, keeping an eye on things. Not exactly thrilling work, but I liked the quiet. Around midnight, I stepped away from the lights to take a leak behind the equipment trailer. I was maybe 50 feet from the road, facing the trees. That's when I noticed how still everything was. No bugs, no wind, not even the usual hum from the field beyond the tree line. Just dead quiet. As I zipped up, I saw a shadow move across the gravel near my feet. At first, I thought it was just clouds, but there weren't any. Sky was completely clear. I looked up, half expecting a bird or low-flying plane. Nothing, not even a single wisp of cloud. Just stars. But the shadow was real. It wasn't fast, it sort of glided across the road from west to east, smooth and slow. Covered the width of the highway, probably wider. There was no noise, no wind, no vibration. I remember that clearly because I just stood there waiting for something. A sound, a breeze, anything. But it was silent. I watched it cross over the floodlight beams and disappear into the trees on the other side. It was shaped long and irregular, not round or winged. Kind of like the outline of something huge but not solid, like a very faint, dark filter moving between me and the stars. Once it passed, everything stayed still. No animals, no wind. It didn't leave anything behind, not even a breeze, and the air felt heavy somehow. Not cold, just weighted. I stood there for a long time. I remember checking my watch, thinking maybe 5 minutes had gone by, but it had only been one. I walked back to the road slowly, scanning the sky the whole time. Still nothing. I asked one of the other guys if he'd seen anything, but he just shrugged, said I probably saw a bat or something. But it wasn't that. Bats don't throw shadows like that, and I know what planes sound like. This was something else. The next weird thing didn't happen until maybe an hour later. I was sitting in the truck, half dozing, when the radio clicked on for a second. Just static, and then shut off again. We hadn't used the radios all night, and they're usually pretty solid. I looked at the handheld sitting in the charger, and the screen was blank, like it had been turned off, even though I hadn't touched it. Right after that, I heard a soft metallic clank from behind the trailer. Not loud, just one of those small, deliberate sounds, someone dropping a wrench onto pavement. I got out and checked. Walked the whole length of the trailer. No one there. Nothing had fallen. Everything was right where it should have been. When I came back around, I noticed something else. The gravel right near where I'd been earlier, where I saw the shadow, looked kind of off, like the rocks had been disturbed, but only in a narrow, straight band, maybe a foot wide. The rest of the gravel was dry and dusty, but this strip looked like it had been tamped down and pressed smooth, almost melted together. I bent down to touch it. It wasn't warm, just firmer, like the surface had been compressed. I didn't tell anyone, didn't feel like trying to explain that. I just stayed in the truck for the rest of the shift, door locked, radio off. The weirdest part happened on the drive home. I finished up around 4:15, got in my truck, and started heading south on Route 12, which runs through open farmland. Just as I was coming up over a low hill, maybe 10 minutes from the site, the headlights picked up something on the left side of the road. It was a shape, tall, thin, not moving. I slowed down, thinking it was a deer or a person. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't either. It looked like a narrow post or figure, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, standing just inside the ditch. I passed it slowly, maybe 20 miles per hour, trying to get a better look without stopping. It didn't move. I only saw it for about 3 seconds, but I couldn't make out any details. Just a tall, vertical shape, dull gray, no shine or reflection. I checked my rear view, but the road behind me was empty. Nothing standing there anymore. That stretch of road has no turnoffs, no fences, nowhere something could hide. I drove home the rest of the way with the windows up and the radio off. The next day, I went back out to the site around noon, just to see if the gravel still looked weird. It didn't. The whole area looked normal, like nothing had happened. The radio in the truck worked fine too. I didn't bring it up again with the crew. Nothing else weird happened that week, but I stopped volunteering for the Ridgeway shift after that. I was flying a routine training flight late one afternoon just circling around the practice area about 50 miles out from base. Clear skies, no traffic on the radio, everything normal at first. I was cruising at about 15,000 feet, checking instruments, running through maneuvers. Then, out of nowhere, my radar flickered. Not the usual blip of another plane, but something weird, like a faint echo that wouldn't lock on. I shrugged it off at first, thinking it was just a glitch or some interference. Happens sometimes. A few minutes later, the radio started acting up, static, crackling, then a sudden drop in signal strength. I checked the frequencies, switched channels, nothing worked. At the same time, my HUD started picking up a blip just ahead, roughly matching my altitude and speed. I glanced out the cockpit window, scanning the sky. Nothing obvious. No contrails, no lights, no shape. But that radar blip was there. Steady, like something was right with me. I decided to see what this was. I adjusted course to close the distance. The blip moved with me, staying just a little ahead. I banked left, it followed. I sped up. It matched pace. It was like it was shadowing me, but completely silent, invisible. I started to feel uneasy. I tried calling it in on the radio, but all I got was static. The onboard transponder showed no other signals, no heat signatures on the infrared scanner, nothing on any of the usual systems. It was just there, a presence, but without any normal signs of being an aircraft. No wings, no noise, no lights. As I followed it, I started noticing something else. The air around me seemed off, like the atmosphere was thicker or my instruments were acting weird. My altimeter wobbled slightly, the compass needle jittered, then my watch, which I keep synced with GPS time, flickered and reset for a moment. I thought maybe it was just interference, but it felt different, like time itself was being affected. I radioed the tower, trying to explain what I was seeing, but my voice came through garbled. They asked if I was experiencing equipment failure. I told them I was trying to figure it out too. The object stayed at my 6 o'clock position for a while, matching speed, altitude, direction. It didn't attempt to communicate or to be seen, really. It just followed. The more I focused on it, the more I felt like I was being watched. Not by a person, but by something else. Something cold and distant. After about 10 minutes of this, I decided to get closer and see if I could spot anything visually. I banked sharply and moved toward where the blip was supposed to be. As soon as I changed course, the blip vanished. Just disappeared like someone flipped a switch. I scanned the sky with binoculars and stared out the window, but the space where it had been was empty. No contrails, no reflections, nothing. I circled back, watching for any sign of it, but there was nothing. The radio cleared up, instruments stopped acting weird, and my watch returned to normal time. It was like the whole thing had never happened. I landed back at base, filed my report, and everyone listened politely but looked at me like I was nuts. The radar didn't show anything unusual, and my logs were clean except for the brief flicker of the blip. But I keep thinking about it. How it stayed right there, following me perfectly for miles without any sound or light. How my instruments went wonky and my sense of time got scrambled. I can't explain it, and I'm not sure I want to, but it was real. Something was there, and it wasn't anything I've ever seen before. I used to work nights at a hospital just outside Flagstaff. It was an older place, 4 floors, not huge, but busy enough that you rarely got a quiet shift. I was on the cardiac unit, and back then we were always short-staffed. I usually took my breaks outside, just to get away from the fluorescent lights and the constant beeping. This happened around 2:30 in the morning, mid-November. Cold, but dry. I remember because I just stepped outside to smoke, and I was annoyed I'd forgotten my gloves. I stood in the employee lot, leaned against the side railing by the loading dock. It was one of those nights where everything felt weirdly still. No wind, no cars on the road, just this thick silence. Even the usual hum from the generators or the HVAC fans was quieter than usual. I was standing there, halfway through my cigarette, when I noticed something above the building. Not moving, just hovering there, right above the center of the roof. It looked like, I don't even know, like a piece of chrome. Polished, rounded, but no real shape I could describe. Not a sphere, not a disc, almost like a drop of mercury frozen in midair. It didn't reflect anything. It had the look of chrome, but when I tried to see the lights from the parking lot or the building reflected in it, there was nothing. just this dull, smooth gray sitting in the sky. It wasn't making a sound, didn't wobble or drift. I thought at first maybe it was my eyes playing tricks, like a floater or something. But I blinked a few times, rubbed them, and it was still there. And then it wasn't. I blinked once, normal speed, and it was just gone. No trail, no movement, just not there anymore. At the exact same time, the power in the hospital cut out. Not just a flicker, everything went completely dark. The exterior floodlights shut off. Inside, through the glass doors, I saw all the hallway lights blink out. It only lasted about 10 seconds, but it felt way longer. I dropped my cigarette, just stood there, staring at the roof. The backup lights came on after a few seconds, the red ones that line the hallways and the ones over the exit signs. I could see them flickering through the entrance windows. A few seconds later, the rest of the power came back. You could hear the HVAC system click and start winding up again. I went back inside fast. It wasn't like I ran or anything, but I wasn't wasting time. The hallway was dim, and I passed another nurse coming out of the stairwell. She looked confused and asked if I'd seen the lights go out. I just nodded. Nobody said anything about the thing in the sky. I didn't bring it up. I wasn't sure what I'd seen anyway, and I figured someone would have mentioned it if they saw the same thing. But no one did. Not that night. Not the next shift. The weird part was that we lost a patient in the ICU around the same time. Not in a dramatic way. He was in bad shape already. It wasn't a code blue or anything. But I looked at the timeline later, just out of curiosity, and his heart monitor flatlined maybe a minute after the lights came back on. I don't know if that means anything. We had a tech check the power system that morning. They said there was a voltage irregularity, whatever that means, but nothing was damaged, and it didn't trip any breakers permanently. They chalked it up to weather, even though it was clear that night. A couple days later, I checked the security footage from the parking lot cams, just on a whim. We're not really supposed to access that stuff unless there's a reason, but I had the code. The footage for that exact 10-minute window was corrupted. It just skipped ahead. Everything else from that night was normal. I still don't know what I saw. I wasn't tired. I'd had coffee. I didn't imagine the blackout because the whole floor was talking about it later. But no one mentioned anything in the sky, and it didn't look like anything I could explain. Not a plane, not a drone. It didn't have lights or edges or markings. It just sat there like it was waiting. I woke up around 6 that morning. Not for any reason, just kind of blinked awake. It was quiet, no wind, no rain, just gray and still. I looked out the bedroom window like I always do, and the yard was full of birds. I thought they were feeding at first, or maybe just resting. There were a lot of them. I couldn't tell what kind from that distance. Some kind of small, black feathered bird, maybe starlings, but something about the way they were positioned felt off. I went outside in my slippers to check, thinking maybe there was a busted feeder or something that spilled seed. When I got closer, I saw they weren't moving, not a single one. They were all dead, just lying there, wings tucked in like they were asleep. Maybe 50 or 60 of them, I don't know. And they weren't scattered. They were in a ring. A near perfect one, maybe 15 feet across, just encircling the main patch of grass. None in the center, none outside it. Just this one circle. I stood there for a long time. It didn't make sense. There were no feathers strewn around, no blood, no sign of predators. They looked totally intact. Their eyes weren't pecked or anything. Some had their beaks slightly open, but most didn't. It was like they all just dropped out of the sky and landed that way. I didn't touch them. I took a few photos with my phone, then went back inside and made coffee. I wasn't sure who you even call for something like that. Animal control? A local vet? It's not like I live in a big neighborhood. Just a few houses spread along a county road. No HOA, no town office. I didn't tell anyone right away. I sat with it for a bit. Eventually, I went back out with a trash bag and gloves and picked them up, just so they wouldn't draw coyotes or anything. They were stiff, like they'd been dead a while, but it hadn't even been that cold night before. The ground was dry, they didn't smell. I buried them in a shallow pit behind the shed. Later that afternoon, I flew my drone. That's kind of my hobby. I don't do it professionally or anything. I just like filming the woods and the property. I've got one of those newer DJI drones with the 4K camera. I flew it maybe 300 feet up and did a wide, slow pan of the yard and surrounding tree line, same as I've done dozens of times. Nothing seemed weird while it was flying. No connection issues, no wind. It landed fine. I pulled the footage that evening to edit, and that's when I noticed it. There was a pixel, one bright dot that didn't move. It was up in the sky portion of the frame. Not in the center, but off to the left, maybe halfway to the edge. It was small, just one pixel, but sharp. Pure white. And it didn't move. Not when the drone turned, not when it climbed or dropped. Every frame, it stayed in the same place in the sky. It wasn't on the lens. I checked, cleaned it, reviewed other old flights. This wasn't dust, it wasn't lens flare, and it wasn't a star either. It was the middle of the day. Overcast, no sunspots, no light leaks, just that dot. I thought maybe it was a stuck pixel in the camera sensor, but it didn't show up on the menus or in stills, only in that one video. And it wasn't there in footage from the next day, even though I flew the same path. I zoomed in on it frame by frame. There was no outline, no movement, no flicker. It didn't react to changes in light, just this fixed glowing speck way up there. That night, I was sitting out on the back step with a flashlight, just looking at the patch of yard where the birds had been. I kept expecting something to come back, more birds maybe, or a fox sniffing around. But it was just quiet, no insects, no wind, even the trees weren't creaking, like everything had paused. Then I heard the hum. It wasn't loud. Barely there, really. Like when you stand near a power station and there's that background vibration you don't notice until you tune into it, except it didn't seem to be coming from anywhere. I turned in a full circle trying to find the direction, but it felt ambient, like it was in the air, not in the ground or from the house. It didn't fade in or out, it just held steady, this low electric tone just outside of hearing range. My chest buzzed with it more than my ears did. It lasted maybe 3 minutes, then it stopped. No click, no fade, just off. The dog next door barked once, and that was it. The next morning, I checked the drone again. I wanted to see if the battery had drained overnight or if any logs showed errors. Nothing. It was fine. But I noticed in the flight app there was a weird data dip around the 3-minute mark in that video. Just a blank spot in the telemetry. GPS, altitude, heading, all flatlined for about 6 seconds. Then it picked back up like nothing happened. I tried to replicate it, but couldn't. That afternoon, I called the neighbor, the one with the dog, just to ask if they'd noticed anything strange. I didn't bring up the birds. I just asked if they'd had any weird power blips or heard anything odd. She said no. But then she asked if I'd seen the lights. I said no, and she dropped it, wouldn't explain. Later that week, I flew the drone again, same path, same time of day. No pixel, no glitches, everything normal. Except now the birds avoid that patch of yard. I still get them in the trees and at the feeder, but they don't land there anymore, not even once. It's just empty. It was just after 3 a.m. when I pulled into the lot behind the Petro off I-80 in Nebraska. I'd been driving since Des Moines, and my back was screaming. My hours were almost up, and I wasn't about to push it. I parked along the far edge of the lot, away from the other rigs, habit mostly. I like quiet when I sleep. I shut everything down, climbed into the sleeper, and cracked the window a little. There was a breeze, and it helped muffle the noise from the highway. I checked my phone, no messages, nothing missed, and set my alarm for 8. I usually wake up earlier, but I needed the rest. I remember drifting off to the sound of one of those big reefer units cycling on and off a few trucks over. Next thing I knew, I was awake again. No sound, no movement, just wide awake. It was still dark, but lighter than before, early dawn maybe. My clock said 5:24. What actually woke me up was my phone. Not ringing, already lit up, sitting face up on the shelf near my head, like it had just finished doing something. The screen said, 1 new voicemail. No missed call, no notification from a number, just the voicemail icon. I sat up and stared at it for a second before picking it up. Checked the call log, nothing. No incoming calls since I'd left Iowa the night before. I tapped into voicemail and put it on speaker. It was just static. No voice, no tones, just that soft, low, crackling white noise. It ran for a few seconds before I heard this faint, weird tapping underneath it. Slow, steady, like something hitting metal, then pausing, then doing it again. I sat there listening, waiting for a voice or some clue, but it never changed. Just static and that tapping. I listened to the whole thing. 3 minutes, 2 seconds, then it ended. I played it again, same exact pattern. After the second time, I downloaded the message and tried to forward it to my buddy Cal, who used to mess with CB recordings and audio stuff. But the file didn't show up. I had the option to share, but when I tried, it said file not available. I went back to the voicemail list, and it was gone. Not deleted. Gone. Like it was never there. I sat there for a long time with the phone in my lap, trying to talk myself out of being weirded out. I checked my settings, rebooted the phone, went through the call log again. Still nothing. No number. No contact. I didn't go back to sleep. I climbed out of the cab around 6:30 and walked across the lot to the diner. Got coffee, eggs, the usual. Tried not to think about the voicemail. The waitress was chatty, and I let her talk at me for a while just to stay distracted. By the time I got back to my truck, the sun was up, and the lot was busier. I checked the truck, did my walk around, logged in my hours, and tried to settle back into normal. I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. I turned the key and the radio came on, tuned to AM 530 for some reason. I always keep it on FM or satellite, so that was strange. 530 is usually dead air, but it wasn't. I heard a low hum, like a carrier signal with no voice, just a steady tone. I changed it and moved on. I drove west for most of the day, stopping in Ogallala to refuel. Somewhere between North Platte and Sydney, I started to get this feeling like something was off. The air felt heavy, like pressure in my ears, but not quite, just enough to make me uncomfortable. Around that time, I noticed the CB was acting up. Channel 19 kept breaking in and out like someone was trying to talk, but cutting off before finishing. At first, I figured it was interference, but it wasn't weather. Sky was clear. Then I picked up this really faint signal, someone whispering numbers, one at a time. Long pauses in between. I listened for a couple miles, but it didn't repeat or make any sense. I flipped through channels. Nothing. When I stopped in Cheyenne that night, I checked my phone again. Still no trace of the voicemail. I even called my own number from a landline to check it. Empty. No saved messages. I slept okay that night, in a better lit part of the lot with a few other rigs nearby. But I kept waking up feeling like someone was standing just outside the cab. Every time I looked, no one was there. The next morning, I got a text. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. It said, that was it. Just the word tap in brackets, spaced like they were trying to match the rhythm. I didn't respond. I blocked the number, deleted the thread, and threw the phone on the passenger seat. For the next few days, nothing else happened. No messages, no voicemails, no weird audio. I finished my run and parked the truck at the yard back home. Took a few days off, tried not to think about it. A week later, I was sitting in my kitchen watching a movie on my laptop when I heard that same tapping. Not on the phone, in the house, from somewhere near the laundry room. 3 slow taps, hollow and sharp, like someone knocking gently on metal with a coin. I got up and checked. Nothing there. Back door locked. Washer and dryer off. That night, I turned my phone off completely for the first time in years. I still use the same number. I've never gotten that voicemail again. But sometimes, when I'm parked at some quiet truck stop late at night, the CB will pick up static for a second, and I'll hear 3 faint taps underneath. Then silence. We were up near the Boundary Waters, middle of September, just me and Nate. Weather was decent when we started, cool, overcast, no real wind. We'd been planning that hike for months, brought maps, printed backups, had everything loaded onto GPS and both our phones. I'd done that route once before years ago, so I had a rough idea of the turns. We'd been on the trail for maybe 4 hours when the clouds got darker, fast. It wasn't a gradual thing. 1 minute it was gray, next it looked like twilight. The temperature dropped a lot too, enough that we both stopped and grabbed our rain shells. I remember saying something like, let's push a little further, maybe get to that rock shelf near the ridge. That spot usually gave decent shelter. We barely made it. By the time we got under the overhang, It was pouring so hard you couldn't see more than 20 feet. Thunder, wind, sheets of rain. It hit like a wall. I checked my phone to see how long it might last, but the weather app wouldn't load. No service. Nate didn't have any bars either. Not too weird, that deep in the woods, but usually we got at least a sliver. We were sitting there, half crouched under the rock, trying to eat protein bars and keep dry, when I noticed my phone screen flicker. Just a little at first, like it was trying to rotate, even though I wasn't moving. Then the brightness dropped on its own. I turned it off and back on, but the screen came back up all scrambled, colored lines like a glitch. It froze, then went black. I thought maybe water had gotten in, even though it was in a sealed bag in my pack. I looked over and Nate was frowning at his watch. His digital watch was flipping through the settings on its own, like someone was pressing buttons. Then it reset completely. Year, time, everything. Zeroed out. Then his phone buzzed, made this high-pitched whine, and shut off too. We looked at each other, not really knowing what to say. I pulled out the compass, old school, liquid-filled dial. The needle was spinning. Not fast, just slowly turning in a circle and not stopping. That got to me more than the electronics. I shook it, tried it again on a flat rock, still turning, like it couldn't lock on to anything. I handed it to Nate without saying anything, and he just stared at it. For a while, we sat there in silence, listening to the storm and watching the rain run down the trees. At some point, I realized I wasn't hearing thunder anymore. The rain was still coming down hard, but there was no sound above it. No wind either, just dead quiet except the water. Then the light changed. It didn't get brighter or darker, just different. Hard to describe. Everything looked flatter, like when a storm rolls through and the light gets yellow and weird, except this wasn't yellow. It was more like bluish-white, but dull. Even under the overhang, we both noticed it. It felt wrong, like it wasn't coming from the sky. Nate stood up and looked around the edge of the rocks, said, "There's something glowing." I moved over next to him. Through the trees, maybe 100 yards out, was this faint bluish light hovering low, like ground level. Not bright, just barely there. It was hard to tell with the rain, but it wasn't moving much. I remember thinking it could have been a tent light or maybe moonlight bouncing off wet branches. Except the moon wasn't out and there were no other campers on that trail for miles. The light didn't flicker. It pulsed, slow and steady like a heartbeat. We didn't talk. We just stood there and watched it for a while. I don't know how long. Eventually the rain started to let up. The light faded out slowly, like someone turning a dimmer switch. Not like it blinked off, more like it receded. That was the last weird thing we saw directly, but stuff stayed off. When we finally packed up and got moving again, we realized our GPS trackers weren't syncing. Mine wouldn't turn on at all. Nate's booted up but just showed a blank map. Like we weren't anywhere. The little arrow that marks your location was stuck in one spot and wouldn't move. I pulled out the paper map and compass, hoping we could orient by landmarks. Except nothing matched. The ridge we were on didn't lead where it should have. The slope was wrong. The rocks were different. We hiked for almost an hour, thinking we were heading west, but the sun came up on our left. Eventually we found a trail marker, but it wasn't the same trail. Not even close. It was red instead of blue, and it had a number we didn't recognize, 237. The one we were on was 15B. I pulled the backup map, and there was no 237 on it anywhere. We figured maybe we'd looped around or gotten turned around in the storm somehow, so we followed the marker downhill, hoping it would link back to something familiar. About a mile later, we hit a gravel road. We hadn't seen a road on our route, not anywhere near where we thought we were. We followed it, thinking maybe it led to a ranger station or parking area. 20 minutes later, a guy in a pickup slowed down and rolled his window down. Asked if we were lost. I told him where we thought we'd started, and he kind of gave us this weird look. He said we were about 9 miles east of there. That didn't make sense. We hadn't covered that kind of distance, especially not with the storm, and definitely not uphill. He gave us a lift back to the main lot where we'd left the car. The guy didn't talk much, just kind of watched us in the mirror. When we got to the parking lot, both of us just sat in the car for a while, not really talking. I remember Nate eventually saying, "That wasn't weather," and I didn't argue. We checked our phones again once we had signal. Mine was totally dead, wouldn't take a charge. Nate's had reset the date to January 1st, 2000. No call log, no photos from the hike. Like everything from the last 24 hours had been wiped. We got back home late that night. I mailed the compass to a friend of mine who collects antique gear, just told him it was acting up and I didn't want to throw it away. He said it was magnetized wrong, like the poles were reversed and unstable, whatever that means. We haven't gone back to that trail. I still hike, but I don't go that deep anymore. Not without backup power and a satellite tracker. I never figured out what we saw, and I don't really want to. I worked the night shift at a small gas station just outside town, the kind of place where the streets are empty and the only sounds come from the occasional car or the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. It wasn't a bad job, mostly quiet, but sometimes that silence got weird. One night, maybe a few months ago, I was doing my usual rounds, checking the pumps, sweeping the floor, making sure the bathrooms weren't a disaster. It was close to 2 a.m., and I was the only one on site. The store was small, nothing fancy, just a few aisles with snacks, drinks, and the usual stuff. The security cameras covered the pumps, the inside of the store, and in the parking lot. I kept an eye on the monitors out of habit, even though nothing really happened here after midnight. Around 2:05, I noticed something strange on the security feed for the parking lot. There was this sudden bright flash of white light, like a camera flash, but way bigger and brighter. It didn't last more than a second, but it lit up the whole lot like daylight for that brief moment. The weird part was that the timestamp on the footage jumped forward 6 minutes, from 2:05 to 2:11:12. It was like the camera skipped over those 6 minutes entirely. I rewound the tape, played it again, but it did the same thing every time. 1 second I'd see the flash, then bam, 6 minutes missing. The footage right before and after looked normal, no glitches or anything. I thought maybe it was a malfunction in the camera or the recorder, but everything else on the system was working fine. The audio didn't pick up any unusual sounds either. No static, no hum, nothing. I went outside to check the lot, just in case something had happened out there. The pavement was dry, no tire marks or footprints that didn't belong. The pumps were fine, nothing damaged or out of place. I looked up at the sky, clear, a few stars, no clouds. There wasn't a plane or helicopter flying over, at least none I could see or hear. At first I figured it was just some weird electrical interference or a power surge messing with the cameras, but the timing was too exact. 6 minutes to the second missing from the timestamp. That stuck with me. Later, I checked the logs from the gas station's computer system. No transactions, no door alarms, no motion alerts for that time frame. The lot was empty the whole time, and the cameras showed no cars pulling in or out during those missing 6 minutes. It was like nothing happened. I told my manager about it the next day, but he just brushed it off as a tech glitch. Said cameras sometimes mess up, especially older ones. I tried to drop it, but something about it kept nagging me. Over the next few nights, I watched the footage from the same camera closely, hoping to catch whatever caused that flash or the missing time. Nothing. No flashes, no jumps, just the same empty parking lot and quiet nights. But then, a few nights later, around 2 a.m. again, I noticed something else. On the video feed, a shadow moved just outside the frame near the edge of the lot. I only caught it for a second, like a figure standing still, but it wasn't in any of the other camera's views. I checked the angle, and it seemed impossible for anyone to be there without being visible from another camera or by me outside. I went out and walked the whole perimeter, but there was nothing. No footprints, no signs anyone had been there recently. After that, I started feeling like I was being watched during my shifts. Not in a usual way, like someone standing right there, but more like a presence beyond sight. I'd hear noises, small things like a faint rustling or the distant buzz of something electronic, but when I looked, nothing was around. The night after I saw the shadow on the footage, I decided to sit outside for a bit during my break. I figured maybe I was just going stir crazy in the store. It was a clear, cold night, and I was leaning against my car, watching the lot. After a while, I noticed a small, dim light flickering in the distance beyond the edge of the gas station's property, near the tree line. It wasn't a car or a flashlight, just a steady, blinking white light. I thought maybe someone was camping or doing something back there, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked over, staying close to the edge of the lot. The light disappeared as soon as I stepped off the pavement and into the grass. I called out a few times, but no answer. It felt like it was gone before I even got close. I got back to the lot and tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a flashlight from a nearby campsite or some reflection from a distant road. But the whole thing didn't sit right with me. The next day, I pulled the security footage from that night to see if the light showed up on camera. I watched the timestamp closely. At exactly 2:03:45, the camera caught a bright flash again, similar to before, but this time it was fainter, like a dull glow. Again, the timestamp jumped forward, this time 4 minutes missing, from 2:45 to 2:07:45. The footage after the jump showed the lot empty, no signs of anything out of place. I started writing down the times these flashes and jumps happened. There wasn't a pattern I could make sense of. Sometimes 6 minutes missing, sometimes 4, sometimes just 2. The flashes happened only at night, always in the early morning hours, and only on that one camera covering the parking lot. I began feeling less safe there, not because I thought someone was going to rob the place, but because of how quiet and wrong it felt. Like something was just beyond my vision, messing with the cameras and maybe with me. One night, near closing time, I heard a soft hum outside. It wasn't like a car or a machine, more like a steady vibration in the air. I stepped outside and scanned the lot. The hum got louder for a few seconds, then stopped. I didn't see anything unusual, no lights, no movement, just the night and empty pumps. I kept watching the cameras for a while, hoping to catch whatever was causing this, but every time I looked, the footage showed nothing except empty lot and the usual flickering of the streetlight. The last night I worked there, about a week ago, the flash happened again. Bright white light that filled the screen for a second. The timestamp jumped 6 minutes again. I watched the footage right after, paying close attention. Then, at the edge of the frame, I thought I saw a shape, just a dark blur moving slowly out of view. I rewound and played it back several times. It was subtle, maybe just a trick of light, but I swear it wasn't there before. I left my shift early that night, feeling shaken. I haven't gone back since, and I'm not planning to. Every time I think about it, about those missing minutes and the flashes, I get this strange feeling that something was there, something I can't explain. I checked the footage one last time before deleting it from my phone. The bright flash, the missing time, the blurry shape, all still there staring back at me from the screen. I don't know what it was or why it happened, but I know it wasn't just a glitch.